Please note the board convened an executive session to discuss matters regarding the employment of particular person or persons, as well as proposed pending or current litigation. With that, I would like to call the meeting to order and ask for everyone to please rise, and we will recite the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. Thank you for being here, and I would like to start by asking if there are any adjustments or comments about the minutes from February 2. Okay, thank you. We'll consider those approved. Thank you, Betty. I will now ask for a motion on the treasurer's report, which was from December of 2022. Is there a motion and a second? Any comments or questions? I actually had a few. I just wanted to go over this. In reading the budget status report, which is available online on our Board Docs platform, it reminded me of a few years ago, or I guess just a couple of years ago, when and I made some notes on this, when there was a challenge to the commissioner on the inclusion of this required budget status report. And along with that challenge came all kinds of accusations and blasts on social media saying the district wasn't doing what it was supposed to be doing. The commissioner completely dismissed the appeal. And when that happens, there was, of course, no accompanying statement to the community. So the community hears the allegation that in this case was pretty simple and straightforward, because we all know the budget status report was in there. But that innuendo was left out there. And there's no correction out there, despite the fact that the commissioner found it to be totally without merit. And I mention this because, once again, a couple weeks ago, the commissioner dismissed another appeal from the same group of folks who were challenging the election. And this one was an appeal to overthrow the community election of 2022. And again, based on a series of unfounded, meritless accusations. And once again, those accusations are blasted on social media and shared through various places to build that distrust in what the board does. And it even, unfortunately, got several well-meaning members of the community to share the outrage over these accusations and even sign on to the appeal, even though it was totally without merit. And I can understand why they would. When you only hear one side and it's put out there, it's easy to be concerned or feel that there's reason to fear. And it becomes an echo chamber, which just amplifies the accusations of a small cadre of people. So I thought it was important because the New York State Commissioner of Education does get to hear the other side and does look at the whole picture. And on January 26th, in Commissioner's Decision 18,230, which is publicly available to everyone online, you'll see another example of the commissioner dismissing the appeal in its entirety. You can do a search. Just go to the New York State Education Commissioner's Decision, click on the Appeals tab, click on Decisions of the Commissioner, and read number 18,230. It included phrases like, petitioner has not proven that respondents violated education law, let alone that the named school officers possess the requisite intent. Petitioner has not explained how their actions violated any provision of the education law. These findings do not establish any wrongdoing by Trustee Wetmore. Petitioner has failed to prove any impropriety, let alone impropriety attributable to the individuals whose removal the petitioner seeks. Petitioner failed to allege that any irregularities affected the outcome of the election or that the electoral process was so informal to the point of laxity. Now, I am not as big a frequent viewer of social media as I used to be, so maybe I missed it, but I don't think that the petitioner went online with the same vehemence to declare great news. Our concerns were unfounded. Didn't blanket those community pages, stating the allegations were without merit and dismissed. So I think it's important to state for the record that these accusations, which are levied to build the distrust, need to be countered from this podium, simply to report that the accusations were false and without merit. And of course, to mention once again, as we're only a few minutes away from discussing a budget that involves $2.7 million of efficiencies, that the tens of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money spent defending the free and fair election of unpaid community volunteers could be spent on something a lot more important for the community's children. And so on that note of savings, which of course involves the budget status report, I did have an actual question about the report that was of course alleged that we didn't get, which is twofold. Number one, I wanted to find out officially if we made the TAN borrowing, which is a big part of that of the cash flow statement, a topic for lack. And what I mean by that is we discussed at the last meeting that we are not allowed to borrow against our own reserves, and therefore we have to pay these lending rates. And when those lending rates were at or below 1%, it wasn't quite as big a deal. But now that they're at 4 or 5%, that does become a big deal. And numbers that used to be low 5 digits are probably going to approach 6 digits. And so I want to just confirm that we are going to put that on LAC's agenda as discussed.
Yes, we will. Yep.
Okay, great. And I also had a question about this in general, which is not a question you answered right away, but in that cash flow report, the end of December cash flow looks solid going forward. So I think it does highlight that the $6.5 million that we had to borrow in October is something that we could maybe look at to determine the necessity of it. It's important to have that. And this borrowing is done, of course, because we have cash flow obligations. We are a people business. This is a personnel industry, and you have to make that payroll. There's no question. It's not, you can't ask a vendor to hold off because in my business, we can ask a supplier in the various ways that people do that to pay people's phone, to wait, etc., without damaging that. You can't not pay your people. 82% of our budget going towards people, approximately. That is something that is just, you have to have the cash to reserve that. But if the cash flow and the benefits are going to be covered by what we have, I think it's worth noting. And I've mentioned this to Jamie before, and he mentioned that we did reduce the TAN borrowing in past years, which is good. And we don't want to not have enough cash flow to cover our obligations. But I think going forward, monitoring how we do that, knowing the, to some degree, unpredictability of when the tax-paying authorities and tax collecting authorities will remit payment to the district, it's worth looking into further to see if we can reduce the cost in that way. Those are my comments on the treasurer's report. Are there any other comments? Okay, all in favor of accepting? Aye. Thank you. We will move on to action 5, which are budget transfers. Do I have a motion? I heard a second as well. Any comments or questions? Aye, thank you. And report number 6, which is a report of our SGO co-president. Please take it away.
Hi, so Mikey isn't here today because he is on the school trip to Spain. So I'll be talking a little bit about those. The school trips just started this week for the language departments. The kids who take, I was gonna say Latin, that's not true, who take Italian left this Monday to go to Italy, and they're presumably having a great time. And the kids from the Spanish classes and the French classes, who they're all involved in the exchange program, they both left on Wednesday, and they also seem to be having a good time. They've only been there for like 24 hours now, but everything seems to be going great on that end. Sports night is coming up, and that's, I believe, March 2nd, and everybody is amping up for that. Themes have been chosen. The overall theme is, I think, television networks. The seniors are Disney Channel. Juniors are Team Nick. Sophomores are, I believe, Cartoon Network, and freshmen are PBS Kids. And besides that, the musical is on track to go up on March 24th and 25th, and the mock trial team just won the second round yesterday. That is all I have.
Great report. Thank you. Were the freshmen assigned PBS Kids?
They had the option between PBS Kids and I think National Geographic, which isn't really, I can't imagine easy to make a dance to. So I think they chose the better of the two options.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. We appreciate the report. You're, as always, you're welcome to stay, but you're also free to have your call. You're very welcome.
Nice night.
Thank you so much. And with that, we will turn it over to our superintendent, Dr. Zublionis, for his report.
Thank you. Great job, Samantha, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for being here. A lot of congratulations this evening, and I do want to say that we will have a formal recognition of a lot of these congratulations in future meetings where we have less density in some of the topics we're talking about. So we look forward to that. But I want to wish first some congratulations to two alumni. Angela Antonori, who's a percussionist who graduated North Shore High School in the class of 2016, and Eileen Zhao, who graduated last year. They both, along with the New York Youth Symphony, were awarded a Grammy for Best Orchestra Performance at the 65th Annual Grammy Awards on February 5th. This is the first time the youth orchestra has won in this category. So, to amazing Vikings, congratulations to you. Also want to wish congratulations to, and this is breaking news, girls, the women's winter track and field team for their season success. They were conference champions. They were county champions, runner-up. 11 students achieved all-county distinction. Seniors Sophia D'Amelio and sophomore Louisa Lundmar both qualified for the New York State Winter Track and Field Championship, to be held on Sunday, March 4th at Ocean Breeze Track and Field Center on Staten Island. Sophia will participate in the pole vault and Louisa in the 1500 meter race walk. For boys track, county champ Caden Paratus for pole vault. Basketball, both of our varsity basketball teams are doing amazing. Women's basketball they're conference champions. They have a playoff game versus New Hyde Park here on Saturday in the high school gym at 12 p.m. Amazing to watch. I hope you can make it. Our men's basketball team had an overwhelming victory last evening over Division High School, 72-47. It's very fun to watch. Very proud of them also. They have their second playoff game tomorrow night at 5 o'clock at Friends Academy. Last evening, we had a very special assembly. We've been talking about a presentation from Chris Herron, who is talking to parents and students earlier in the day about his story and his battle with addiction. One thing that he made very clear was that his parent presentation is very different from the student presentation, but we were able to have all students in grades 7 through 12 in one form or another, either live streaming or in person in the high school auditorium to see the presentation. And we had a lot of parents there last evening as well. Very touching, very emotional, but a reminder of the amazing work that people like Chris and CASA are doing for our most precious natural resource, our students, and a reminder that we all need to work together to protect our children. And even our seniors, we'll call children, they all need our support. And I want to really thank North Shore CASA and Alison Camardella for making this program possible, and all the other programming that CASA does to support in our schools and their own programming. It's really amazing. Also, the Booster Club, Arts Angels, SEPTA, the high school PTO, and the Viking Foundation supported this program, so thank you. Samantha really mentioned this, but we have some great international trips happening right now to Italy, the Spain trip, and the French trip. And it was really amazing, exciting. If you came last night, we had a lot going on at the high school. We had the French trip leaving. We had the varsity playoff game, men's playoff game, and then we had Chris Herron. So there was a lot going on, a lot of excitement, but a lot of great energy as well. One more congratulations, two more athletic congratulations. Wrestling, we had one student who's a county champ and who qualified for the state championship, Christos Vlahopoulos. And we had two other students who qualified for the state championships, Isaac Bratter and Andrew Pavilli. Great job. And those state championships are in Albany, appropriately, on the 25th and 26th of February. Our cheerleaders are back, and we're very excited for them. The build up to the fundraising and all the work that the parents and the cheerleading community did to be able to go to Disney for the Nationals. They moved past the first round, and they did a great job. We're very proud of our cheerleaders, and we look forward to formally recognizing them and all these other fine student athletes in the near future. I wanted to mention something that some of our curriculum directors and Dr. Smythe have been working on, the TENS program, Talent Exploration at North Shore. This is our new and re-envisioned summer program. We just sent out a mailer on this. It will be similar timing. There will be a small fee this year that we're looking at just to keep the program going because the grant funding that we had in the past has run out. But we're excited to explore this new program, new structured, some of these great opportunities. And so we're going to send more information, registration information out shortly. Also wanted to mention we're going to have our final budget boot camp on March 1st at central office at 9:30. What we've been doing with the budget boot camps is really kind of wrapping in the previous board meeting and the board meeting discussion. So we give you the most up-to-date information. And then, of course, after the budget is the final budget is adopted, we'll have our budget talks throughout the community. And we're looking forward in a world now with fewer restrictions at getting out into the community, talking to different groups. And I'm excited to do that with Mr. Bath's Dr. Smythe. Finally, we will have another parent university on March 8th. I believe Samantha didn't mention this. This is the new date of the faculty student basketball game, which I'm going to try and practice the possibly. I might be the water boy, but I might come in for a couple of seconds if I have the courage. I'm trying to get Mr. Pappas and Dr. Smythe to join me. And that will be on March 8th. But we're also going to have a parent university about our band program. So very excited. I think Ms. Larson will be involved in that, Ms. Rodriguez. So we're excited for that. Thank you all.
I found myself, I think it was after the cheerleading fundraiser, I found myself in the gym with you, and it was so funny. Coach Freund just very quickly, all right, everyone move along. We have a basketball practice. But Mr. Contreras, high school principal, made a 3-pointer on an errant ball. That was impressive. So he may be suiting up as well. He's got some game. We will now move on to the meat of our meeting tonight, which is the budget review. We are covering a lot of this budget tonight. I want to mention for anyone who's watching online or looking at this afterwards, the board adopted a new format for our agendas a couple of years ago, and it took a little while to sort of get it all together, but this year really saw the fruits of what we were looking for, which is to have the specific pages that we're looking at accompanied by the links to the pages, so anyone anywhere can see them really seamlessly. It's important for public awareness, but also for transparency for what we're doing. Just very briefly, that does not happen by accident. That's actually the legwork of people putting it in. By people, I mean largely Betty Campy. So thank you very much. It's really, this is what we all envision when we put it together. So thank you. And with that, we are going to begin. Just give everyone, including myself, a chance to open up our books.
Are we going to be going in the order of?
Yes, we're going to be going in the order that is listed on the site. The only thing that I just want to mention before we start, and this is a very small wild card, is we had enrollment discussion set up as the end of last discussion, and I don't know if we passed over it at all. I just wanted to give everyone a chance if they had any questions about enrollment to come through. So that's in section C in the very, very beginning. And we can start there. Just give everyone a chance to pull over there. We have these books, and they're approximately 2.5 inches thick. Mine's gotten thicker because we had some replacement pages. I'm keeping them all in here. I should be shredding them as we go, but as we get slightly, because this is an iterative process as we go through, even from the initial discussion, the initial printing, and it was a discussion that we had, when do you print? Some new state numbers became formalized. Some new BOCES aid numbers became slightly formalized, but $5 different in one place changes 10 other things. So that's the cascading effect of new information. But I will ask any questions on enrollment, and not just because I have a couple, but please, if anyone else does, go for it. Yeah. Trustee Cashman, please.
Not really a question, but I just found it very fascinating, and I don't know if we're unique to other districts, but I know that we employed professionals to do projections as to what our enrollment would be, and it was fascinating to me that not only are we outpacing the projections and that our enrollment is about 2.5% higher, generally speaking, in every building, but that when people enroll, when students are enrolling at almost every grade level put through the elementary, it's not, a one and done situation. The dynamic is it's not scientifically proven, but that our wonderful schools are attracting residents at each grade level. So I just wanted to make note that, I think that enrollment has been a community discussion for quite some time, and that we are outpacing projections is encouraging to make. delicate balance, but it's interesting.
It's a really interesting point because, and this is why we have this kind of awkward blue and red. You know, the blue is what we have rolled over plus the projection from BOCES. And we did do updated projections, in fact, in 2021. That's a very accurate, up to date projection, but still nothing more up to date than our actual enrollment. And as a principal in the district, you know from experience that you get students over the summer, you have students moving in. So projections are just that.
Other comments about enrollment? I just had a couple, which is that the board also gets periodic monthly enrollment reports, so we know who's the numbers of kids in our buildings and various demographic breakdowns. But I noticed that basically I compared the numbers in this enrollment projection to the most recent one we had, which was December of 2022 for the cohorts to look at the numbers. Now I'm guessing when you put it together, you were probably looking at November or even October, but it is a very straight carryover. So the assumption of these numbers is that if there are 57 kids in Glen Head in a certain cohort, that there will be 57 kids returning in the following September, the 3rd or 4th or something like that. But I also know when I first got on the board, just because I was curious, because to the point Trustee Cashman made, anecdotally, we know that people move here with kids throughout. A house goes for sale, and generally it's someone without kids moving out and someone with kids moving in. And so I did a study of cohorts going back about 20 years and looked at the progression of where they started and what they accrued each year, what we lost. We obviously lose a selection of kids from 8th to 9th as they choose private schools, parochial schools, etc. But overall, a cohort increases between 50 to 60 kids from kindergarten to when they're done. And that's kind of borne out. We have 53 kids at Glen Head School in first grade, right? Projected for next year, we think that's what we have in kindergarten at the end. And we have, well, I should use a large number, but in the first grade projection right now, we have 57, 167, and we're graduating classes that are going to be somewhere around 210. That's about 50 kids, 40, 45, 50 kids. Well, my question is, as we use the number directly from a carryover without factoring in growth, where does that leave us in terms of contingency? Right now, our classes are all projected to be on the elementary level between 15 to 22 kids, which I think is what the community has been expecting, and I think is optimal for those kids when we can do it. But where's the breaking point? How do we figure that out? And what do we do in terms of planning this budget to account for the clear history of additional kids?
Thing that Mr. Pappas and I did with Dr. Smythe is try to build in contingency positions. So there are a few contingency positions that could be applied flexibly to where they're needed, whether that's at the elementary level or at the secondary level. And if those weren't needed, then that would become future budgeted contingency positions that we would put into. But we have in some years needed to rely on them.
And look at these numbers. You're presenting this to us right now. I should just mention, as I probably do every meeting, this at this point is the administration's budget, which they're presenting to the trustees to publicly review in the way they were doing tonight. And then on March 23rd, we will be officially adopting a budget. And at that point, it becomes the board's budget that is then presented to the community. But as it's still your budget, I just want to confirm you're comfortable between what you projected here and the contingencies that we will not end up with sudden spikes that we can't accommodate.
Yes, we spend a lot of time with our elementary principals at their individual budget meetings, talking about that, talking through that. They provide us with their own enrollment numbers and projections for what they've seen. And K through 12, we looked at class size throughout all of our courses, and we did course audit processes this year. So that informed that throughout the system, that more at the secondary level.
Questions on enrollment before we move on? Marianne?
Just on that note, I'm just going to say that when you look at these elementary classes, you only have 3 classes in each grade level. So that's actually down from, let's say, 10, 15 years ago. But there is room in these class sizes. and many of them for additional students. So if you did get additional students coming into school, in particular, I'm looking at like the first grade, let's say, you have 18, 18, and 17 at Glenhead, 16, 15, 16, and 17 at Glenwood Landing, 15, 15, and 16 at Seacliff. Those classes in and of themselves, if you got more students in, you would have room to accommodate them without the need for a contingency position. And then I guess my other question is, we've had this issue in the past when there's disparity in the class sizes amongst the different buildings. So have this issue in particular at Glen Head where we had 21 kids and the classes we ended up breaking three, and then in Sequel they had 12 kids and that same grade level, 15 kids. So do we have any thoughts about, you know, what we would do if there was, you know, things go in cycles, right? So when I was looking here, everyone said, oh, you have to be in Glenwood Land. And then everyone said, oh, you have to be in the Glen Head School. And others said, oh, you have to be, and there's really honestly no difference. They're all being taught the same thing. They're wonderful teachers and all of them. But, you know how that works, right? So, I guess my point is, would we consider looking about maybe changing lines about where people go to school if we had a bubble for people to avoid putting in an additional teacher?
We haven't gotten that far in our analysis, given where we are right now. It has come up in conversations. We talk about the Engineers Country Club and how that could possibly put an impact very specifically on Glenwood Landing School, and that could necessitate that. I think as we look at the budgeting process this year and moving toward trying to find a responsible budget, find some efficiencies, I think those are conversations we might have to have in the future. More challenging when we have to play that balance. I think right now that hasn't come up. I think we would, if we did have a spike in the summer or a certain time for a certain building grade, we would have that conversation with you about our recommendation. If we're seeing that, I guess, to your point, on a more systemic level, that, I think, there could come a time that we have to have that conversation.
Like you said, a new development, right?
Yeah.
That would impact one school. We talked about that in the past when there was a proposed development that would have impacted the Glenhead School, which was already at capacity. And the development never materialized, but had it would have it had multiple family homes. Right, and that would have had a big impact on Glenhead at that time.
Sorry, I think it's a really good question because, good question, but also apropos of what is out there in the public discussion with regard to the governor's budget and potentially development of potentially lower income or certainly higher density housing in our areas that are near transit authorities. It's a little in the distance, but as we talk about Engineers Club, we talk about the Glen Harbor projects that are more imminent. I think that should be included in that same parenthetical clause because it seems like something may be happening. Certainly, many community groups and the local municipalities are aware of it, monitoring it. We've heard a lot of talk about it, and it's all very theoretical right now. But it does stand to reason that additional children will potentially be coming into our schools. Personally, I'm not speaking for the whole board. We do really great things here, and the idea of bringing more people to the education we provide is something that is exciting. But it certainly will be a strain on the resources. Thank you. Other questions about enrollment? Comments? Okay, following our map here, the next section are revenue projections, and I'm not sure if you or Jamie want to walk us through maybe what this is or how we, we do. This is section F, if my memory serves.
So I'm going to start with some very general information, then I'll let Jamie supplement. And this is also it serves as a good bridge from our last meeting, the budget presentation, to now the more specific budget codes. In our initial discussion of the presentation of the draft budget, we talked about budget pressures of about $10.6 million, and that was a number that included $3.5 million loss of revenue, including the loss of LIPA revenue, the loss of it fully expending of a grant, the Marcelino Levine grant, and then $7.1 million in new expenses. And so that was our raw budget pressure number. And that number we talked about being really driven by this inflationary environment. You know, and that 7.1 number is something that other districts are experiencing too, with inflationary costs, the cost of healthcare, benefits, fuel, heat, anything that is a kind of an overhead cost for a school district has gone up. We did receive an increase in state aid of about $2.5 million overall. And unfortunately, you know, that is not enough to offset those new expenses. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to just talk a little bit more about the other revenues and the revenue picture.
Apologize. Looking at the schedule, the 5-year projection, some of the numbers that have been increased, unfortunately, due to interest rates have gone up on the borrowing side, but they have also allowed us to gain better interest with our deposits and our investments. So we've increased items such as the interest. We've also tried to offset things, increasing the out of district tuition, which about halfway down you'll see. And that is primarily due to an influx of students that we would have reimbursable costs for St. Christopher's and some of the other schools. So those numbers have also gone up to help offset some of the increases in the budget. Beginning at the top, one thing that's you can see is the change in the LIPA, the pilots at the very top under the, and I apologize, I'm looking under the blue shaded 22, 23, 24 numbers on the schedule, just following my memo. We had the regular pilots, which are for the 4 peaking stations. We also have pilots that are still on the books for the properties that were originally in 2015 taken off the tax rolls and added to pilots. And then finally, we have a $11 million in the direct assessment payments that we're receiving from LIPA, and that was the start of the $1.8 million drop from one year to the next. Was we will receive $12.9 million less this in the current year, and next year it's dropping by that much. As Chris had mentioned, we did lose the Marcelino and Levine grant. That has fortunately been kind of offset with the money that we received from LIPA in our settlement, and we've added $1 million to cover that loss. Not in particular, but that does offset that one. ARS and ERS reserve to help the situation. And finally, probably most importantly, we have the estimated tax levy of the $89 million, which is roughly a 3.7 tax levy. Budget to budget we've discussed is 3.7. Our budget to budget increase is roughly 3.8. That amount.
One thing I wanted to mention is we are starting to get information in from other districts, you know, the superintendents and we're seeing some districts below. We're seeing more districts, I think, than usual above our number of a budget to budget increase because of the inflationary environment that we're living in. And the other thing I did want to mention that we shared with the board was that because of some late breaking numbers that Jamie received, BOCES capital expenditures and state building aid, that does modify the tax cap formula a little bit. So it does bring down the maximum tax cap amount in our formula slightly to the original was 4.826, $430 down to $4,744,917. So 5.61%, 5.52%.
And as you had mentioned, that primarily had to do with building aid exclusions that we received, BOCES aid exclusions that need to be factored into the tax cap calculation that were not available with the initial meeting, and also a change. The county had predicted a tax-based growth factor, which is a number that also factors into the calculation of the tax cap of one even, and they had made an error for 22 districts, and following our last meeting, they increased ours, which serves to increase the tax cap from 1.0 to 1.006. Small increase, but it does make a difference.
I'm going to add one thing that Jamie and I have talked about at the budget boot camps. Not only are we losing the LIPA direct assessment revenue relative to last year, but in addition, those revenue sources were on the tax roll last year. So we're also losing what would have been the tax increase that everyone else is paying as well. So there is an additional loss there if we think about it that way too, that we would have had.
We lose the tax increase. We got double whammy because it's not a pilot; it's a direct assessment. So if they had just made it a pilot, we would get the 2% increase. So we don't even get that. We just get the number.
The mutant pilot, it doesn't accrue any increase in value, decreases over time, but it's a direct payment like a pilot, but yes.
First I heard that, I like it. Sure.
We try to keep it fun.
Nothing more fun than losing. tremendous amount of
Yeah,
revenue. Any thoughts or comments about revenue projections? Maria?
The physical logistics are challenging with this note. Jamie, some of these are really niggly little things. I just, my feeble brain needs actual clarity on, so forgive me. And some are just reinforcing what was just said. Actually, so let me start with a simple one. I'm just curious, this is pure curiosity, the LIPA pilots that still exist, the 2 peaking stations on one line and the 4 remaining from 2015, I think is that. I'm just curious, why are they on separate lines? They're both pilots. Is this something, is it an accounting, an easier accounting thing?
Because of it had always been presented this way, so I wanted to continue to present it that way since the peaking stations have been separated out in the past. They can be combined. Also wanted to make a note of those that were originally not the peaking stations, but the 4 that were left were originally grouped with all of the other pilots, and a good portion of them were taken off and now grouped with the direct assessments. That number was $7 million in the previous year and has now drastically been reduced when even those pilots became direct assessments.
Year-to-year comparisons are obviously much more straightforward. And of course, I just wanted to note for anybody following from home as well that as Dr. Z just said, the pilots do show, if you look across, they do show small increases. They're not very big, but they are increasing every year, whereas the direct assessments are in fact decreasing every year. And until we get to 2027, which is a whole different discussion again. But okay, so that was one thing. Let's see. you mentioned, and this may be something that will come up again later, but you mentioned on the tuition that we're anticipating an increase. I'm sorry, I missed what is behind that anticipation.
We have several students that are attending schools where we will be reimbursed for and the student number has risen from last year to this
Student
year.
number
So
has
it's an offset of the expense that's on the books as well.
So later on in one of the other detail pages, we see the cost of St. Christopher's, for instance. So it is in that line that says tuition includes tuition from New York City and other districts. That's where we see the reimbursement of the St. Christopher's tuition.
Right.
Okay.
The line before where it says this tuition special ed programs, I was surprised to see that it was stable across the future years, because I thought that was going to be one sort of initiative that we took to try to increase some revenue.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think part of, we're not factoring that in as a sure thing, so to speak, yet. But we'll make more projections as we build that out. Yeah.
I was also thinking, like, every school, right, is going through the same process we are. And if they're going to be sending a student to us, right, they need to factor that into their budget right now. And so it's almost like we have to, if we're talking about next year, right, now's the time to get the word out. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly we look forward to those. I will say,
I can go
No,
on.
no, I do, we do, and this is part of the challenge of special education budgeting, is that those needs are always moving and moving. I do hear what you're saying. I think a lot of those students are like students we know months in advance. So, but a good point.
Yeah, budget boot camp, we did cover that. I asked one of my questions, sources of revenue. That's one of the big things. And I like the idea of not counting any chickens, and not, when I book certain international transactions, I don't use the spot rate of the day. I add a vig on there, because when I actually have to pay the invoice in 30 or 60 days, I'd like to be pleasantly surprised. So you keep this number 125. If you can build a program around it, great. That's going to be an offset we're going to need. But I understand also you don't want to put specific numbers on it, and I feel like you have to.
I just want to make sure that that was still a vision that we had.
And the goal is to get to a point, hopefully, in a couple of years where it can be more of a sure. Yeah.
Revenue projection questions? Oh, Maria, sorry. Maria, just for whatever reason, if you like,
Right, for the moment, I think I have them covered.
you
Thank
do.
you.
Okay, great. The only one I had was just a confirmation, of course, that, as you said, the numbers changed due to some BOCES numbers, but we're not going all the way to the cap. So the question then becomes, how does that work? How does that affect us in future years? Because you mentioned this cliff. Glide paths don't go down $2.5+ million in a year. That's not a glide. That's a drop. But next year is the last giant one like that. After that, it does get more flighty. So the question is, in the next year's number, how does not going all the way to the cap? I realize the budgets are driven by the actual needs and by what we think serves the kids without reducing program. How does not going to the cap this year affect our ability to potentially recoup those monies in the future year if we need to? Just the nuts and bolts of it.
And when we spoke at the last meeting, I talked about the potential for utilizing anything that was left over in the prior year for next year, because we are below the cap, but much of that has to do with our construction and capital expenditures. I had checked further into it, and I don't know that we can utilize what we leave on the table. I would say leave on the table this year in terms of a cap next year. However, because of our continued expenses with regard to capital projects, which factors into the tax cap calculation, next year we'd probably be in a very similar place where our tax cap is, high in terms of what we would need to fund next year's budget.
Genetic ability to raise taxes, which we know is only go so far. Thank you. Other questions on revenues before I put this page back in my book? Please. I'm putting my page away anyway, but
That's fine. I think it's a little bit confusing for me, and so I'm assuming for those playing the home game. Can you mentioned it in as in your opening, but could I see that the bullets grant from Senator Goran accounts for is accounted for in future, and I don't think that that we it's my understanding that we necessarily can't depend on that particular named revenue source. So I was interested in maybe clarifying that for people reading and also myself. And I also, to a point that Dave made, I love your optimism that next year is, the kind of the last big leap. But I have concerns about our use of the settlement, because those are monies that we also have to kind of find in the future, and it's millions of dollars to make up for in our programming. It's just not, they're not revenue, they're band-aids. So I when I see other band-aids, I think it's important that I'm thinking ahead in terms of this year is just the first year, and when we're reading through this, there's not a lot of fat in these budgets, right? So I think it's important that we're thinking of the whole picture of these losses as much as we possibly can.
Right, and when we started talking about the loss of revenue and the models we were building, we have that short-term revenue, like these bullet grants. We will have, and we already have in hand, that the Goran money for next year. Very thankful to Senator Goran for all of his support, and we are working to obtain the help of our lobbyists and Legislative Action Committee more grants with our current legislators. So that does take maintenance every year, and you're right that the trick is to replace that eventually with sustainable revenue, so that dependency is not always something that we have to find. However, we're going to have to keep working in the short term. We are going to have to rely on those short-term revenues, especially I think the next year.
With regard to the bullet grant, as you mentioned, we did include it because the step down in the receipt of LIPA money is over the next 2 or 3 more years from this year. We did include it because it was given to us based on the LIPA situation, and we are hopeful. Hopeful and maybe over optimistic, but that we do get it in those 2 remaining years, and that's why it was included in there. We already have it for next year's budget, which we didn't know a few weeks ago, and now we're working on it for the following year.
it is out of there for 26, 27, and 27, 28. So we won't change that.
So just remind me of another question I had. We talked a lot at the beginning of the year, maybe the end of last year, about applying for different kinds of teaching grants. I know you ran the workshop, Carol. Those, have we been successful at that? And those grants, if I'm correct, don't appear here, right? They appear within the other sections.
So we have the part of the Viking Community Committee. One of the subcommittees is working on grants. So they're still applying for those. We haven't actually received any yet. So very much a work in progress.
Thank you.
If they come through, I'm sorry.
No, please go.
Well, just to follow on that, if we were, and let's be optimistic, we will be successful. When we get some grant money, it would be reflected in revenues, wouldn't it?
It would, and it would result in fund balance or things to be utilized in future years if we come to that point where that we do have extra money in any one.
We get a PD grant every year. We used to use it. It was like $200,000. We used to use it to offset teachers' workshop. And if you look at some of the codes, you'll see in red eligible for an offset from the grant. So is that some of that money that we have gotten every year for professional development? We always get a bunch of stuff.
Yes, those would be our title funds, and we do use that to offset some of our PD.
That's not written here on.
In the revenue.
Right.
No, it's not included in the revenues, but as we go through the expenditure budget, as you had mentioned, it would be, you'll see at the bottom, you know, a portion that's taken out, a reduction based on those grants.
That goes through the consolidated application that we submit over the summer, very beginning of the school year. So that's why we always get it, but there's a chance that
I had a couple of follow-ups. I don't know how I missed one of these. It's highlighted right on the sheet, but just wanted to talk about the reserves for another minute. So we are planning to use, we have in the budget that we will use 200 from DRS this year and 360 from TRS in the current budget. And you are projecting an increase in the TRS usage over the next 4 years. Not the last one, sorry. Just wanted to understand how the thinking goes on, you know, we have the money there. This is a valid purpose. I know these are the two reserves where we're actually able to have a little bit of flexibility with them, but we also are always having to balance what we might also need them for their original intended purpose.
Correct. And we did increase it over the next couple of years, knowing that we will also have increases, reductions in revenue elsewhere. But didn't want to rely too much on it. It does affect us, even, you know, our reserves, our fiscal score rating as to how well, you know, how we're rated, is affected by the level of your reserves, the level of your fund balance. So we also take that into account because it could affect our ability to borrow and the interest rates that we receive there. Not that you want to hold on to reserves specifically for that purpose, but it is something that we take into account as we look forward to use them. And as we get out of the situation that we're in with regard to LIPA, we start to use them less, and that was the intent.
Do we have opportunities to replenish them ideally,
Absolutely, yes.
optimistically? Okay. Sorry, I had one more and it's gone again. If it comes back on.
This is, you know, we're asking a lot of questions in this slide, but this is the big picture of what we're doing here. And this really summarizes, it's not just the revenue projections for 4 or 5 years from now, but it's also a way that we have crafted a long-term approach to be able to get through this. I think the messaging has been for a couple of years that there were going to be, you know, a 4-pronged approach to how we were going to be able to handle this. And that was going to be certainly through increased aid and support and these grants that we've been able to achieve. Luckily, the settlement, I'm counting in it, pumping in that group. Efficiencies in program and cuts is probably the harsher version of that word, but that is one of the legs of the 4-legged stool. Taxes, as we had said, are a part of this 4-legged stool, and the fourth is the use of those reserves. We have them, and you need them for that quote unquote rainy day, but here we are.
I think I'll add on to that. I think that leads to something that we're going to see many more times as we go through this budget. It speaks to the importance of maintaining the reserves and considering the establishment of a new capital reserve. So it has a slightly different use than these two, but it seems to me that as I've gone through this, particularly with facilities, we need to try to get back to the effort we made last year and see if we can recraft it in a way that meets approval.
I'm certainly never going to get biblical here from this podium, but certainly the idea of a certain amount of period of peace and for the period amount of famine, you have to whittle down those reserves to be able to get these. And then when we get to a certain point, we can begin to rebuild with that sensitivity to the tax paying, but also the kids and the future kids and our staff and faculty. So it's a lot of different factors. One has a stake. They're all stakeholders, and we try to do that balance. Chris had a very simple graphic that I think showed it all with the scales.
Last, maybe typo, maybe just my misunderstanding. The estimate of the foundation aid what we are looking at, thanks to your deliveries the other day, is actually no longer, so tentative, right? We know now for sure what our foundation aid is.
It is still the governor's budget, and it's not official until April when the legislature acts on it. So that's why we keep that word in there. Is that, yeah.
That is correct.
Okay.
But we are more confident of what
Yeah.
the number is as opposed to the estimate that was
Okay.
kind of thrown out there based on last year's numbers and the hearsay of what we thought we would get. Certainly we have a more definitive number now, but it could change slightly between now and April.
Okay, great.
Hey, if there are no more questions on the big picture stuff,
Nope.
we're going to go. Great, this is a great question. We'll move into the line by line budget review. We will start on page 1. Makes sense to me. And as everyone gets there, each of these sections has a bit of a blurb at the front, which I'll read as we all turn our books, so the community and the board are all on the same page, knowing where we are. And the first place we start, for better or worse, is the Board of Education page. And this part of the budget covers general council expenses, legal hearings, expenses for the annual budget vote and the election of trustees, conferences for board members, mandatory fiscal training for board members, legal expenses, oil, freedom of information law responses, border property disputes, service provider contract reviews, district clerk expenses, and the Board of Ed, as you see, is made up of 7 unsalaried members of the community elected to serve 3-year terms. So we're in section, the tab says Board of Education, and it's the one that follows proposed budget 23-24D. Sorry, Marion, thank you.
So I have a question on the 75,000 for the life hearing, and I understand the annotation about the actions that have been brought by American Water and National Grid that have included the district. But it's the same complaint that they issue every year. We successfully done a motion to dismiss for at least 1 or 2 years. The rest of them are being held in abeyance right now. 75,000 seems a lot to me for a motion to dismiss. So I'm wondering if that is something that we can look at, maybe budgeting a little less for.
May I just piggyback on that with I think a PS that can be answered at the same time. I noticed that the LIPA hearing was also budgeted in our 5-year projections all the way through. And I think it's the same relevant question.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to say that I have the same exact note, and I think there was a note in the 5-year projection that said that weren't expecting the hearings to continue. So I have.
And the amount that's actually on that line and probably would have to change the annotation underneath it is also for our lobbying firm, which is it's almost 60. I believe it's 60. Their new new number. It's about 10 for potential legal
attorney.
and so my apologies.
That's I think I could get 1,000 for a motion to dismiss.
I will add though, now that I understand that DHD is in there, I think just because I've been lucky enough this year to have more interaction and was able to accompany the trip on Lobby Day, I think that our lobbyists are in fact really stepping up to the plate right now, working very hard to help us get through the difficult times right now, and I anticipate we're going to need them to do the same exact thing every year for at least for the next 5 years. So I that does seem totally valid to me now.
That's a great clarification that we got. Any other questions on the Board of Ed?
I guess I was concerned about the legal hearing charges. So if we look at starting from 2019, the actual expenditure was $260,000, and the following year $681,000, and then in 2021 $276,000. So I was just curious how you
how you came up with 150,000.
I did look at where we currently are and some of the things that we've dealt with in the past we haven't had to deal with as much in the current year. So I believe that number will be down. I did increase it. It had been at 60 for a number of years, and one of my reasons for increasing it was exactly that. And as the budget got tighter, there's less contingencies to pull from to fund that line. So it was a balance between where we were and where I expect we'll be.
It's just so much variability.
Yeah, well, our budget book, of course, shows the approved budget for this year because we don't know until really the auditing in August what we've actually spent. But the previous years where it says actual expenditure for 1920, 2021, 21, 22 are these large 6-digit numbers. You're saying it was 60 that was budgeted for those years.
Yes.
So, for example, we spent $277,000 in 21, 22, a year that was budgeted 60. So that's 210 that was not available to be returned to the taxpayer in the form of a reduction in future of tax levy. Right. Those things. Okay.
The next year,
Yeah, $682,000 on a $60,000 budget.
And I think that had a lot to do with COVID and reopening plans and a lot of work that went on to do with that or not.
It's all those extra legal things. I think everyone, less litigiousness is good. Okay. Other questions in this section?
But this is not, just so we're clear, this is impartial hearing. This is a
Yeah,
lot of things. This is not just,
It's not just the foils.
it's not just the FOIL. So it's, impartial hearing, other things as well, other legal fees.
Absolutely. Basically, it's non-retainer stuff from our regular council, and also the things that weren't covered by the LIBOR.
And in any year you can have things.
Oh, yeah.
Construction is not covered by, but so the year we had a problem with the track failing, and we were, litigating over that, we have large fees that year for construction, related to construction. So you never know.
True. Okay, I'll move on to section central administration, which is this budget covers the salary of our superintendent of schools, his office staff, the business office, auditing services and public information service. As per state law, the superintendent is the chief executive officer of the district, and the business office is responsible for the development and administration of this budget, accounting, payroll, benefit administration, purchasing accounts receivable and payable, human resource management, food service, transportation. There are 3 levels of auditing in the district: claims, internal and external, and our claims auditor examines all claims to ensure they are all proper, and our legal charges against the district. The primary responsibility of the internal auditor is to assist the Board of Ed in ensuring that the district's risks are identified and that appropriate internal controls are in place to address those risks. And the external auditor expresses an opinion on whether the district's financial statements are free of material misstatements. And all 3 firms are independent contractors. And for the record, it's not listed, but our audit meetings are public and videotaped and include 2 members of our community to also ask questions. Questions on pages 2 through 4. Ask about the getting lack on the TANs, but I discussed that during treasurer report, so I'm okay.
I'm a little interested on page 4 on the public, the postage and supplies. So the actual expenditure in 21, 22 was 28,000, and we're budgeting 19,000. I was just curious. Are we doing something different in terms of our communication? Is it because
I do think it's in part because we're relying more on electronic communication. That adjustment.
Dave, just for the LAC liaison over here, can you just clarify what you just said about the TANs?
Oh, just that the idea of reducing our cost of issuing those TANs
Okay.
by allowing ourselves to borrow against existing reserves, such a temporary cash flow need,
Mhm.
would be something that could save us substantial money.
You were reminded of it because of the
The
associated legal fees?
No, line A 1420-402-90, which is legal dash tax anticipation notes. Here's just a placeholder that.
Right.
That's an opportunity. That's
Got
not
it.
the cost of that borrowing,
Got it.
or that issuance, but
Just to add on, Jamie and I had a little interaction about that because I was curious about it too. And were we able to borrow from ourselves to pay the TANs? We would have saved $200,000 this year. That
Roughly, yes.
yeah. Another strategy that I think is worth pursuing is to consider joining forces with other business administrators from other districts. And he and I responded about this, and maybe doing a letter to sign on from multiple districts to talk about this change of policy, not just rely on our own forces, but really to kind of create more awareness about this.
Have super lax.
I'm aware.
So, it was, yeah. And we have a legislative breakfast, with multiple districts with our legislators for things like, when Senator Martin was there, I talked to him about creating a TRX reserve. Those were like things that we talked about, state testing. And it was Garden City, Manhasset, I want to say Roslyn, but I'm not sure. It was definitely Garden City, Manhasset. There was one other district though in there. I just can't think. No, maybe Port Washington. I don't know. There was a fourth district. And anyway, so topics that, that you would, that what Chris would discuss at the superintendent's council, that we wanted a group effort on. All these blacks would go, and we prepare a joint letter. And we have, I think, 2 meetings a year of Super LAC, one in the fall and one in the spring. And we try to revive it. I want to say that 6 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, and it wasn't successful. But times are changing, so maybe there will be some interest in, reaching out to other districts that participated in the past. And I seem to remember who the fourth district is. I'll probably think of it in the middle of the night tonight for you. But
I
it was
actually think I have it
definitely
jotted down
Garden
as well somewhere.
City. Yeah, it's definitely Garden City and
Don't call me, but text me. That would be good.
Jack.
certainly on an issue like changing the law, the way that districts can borrow, is an issue larger than North Shore. To benefit all the neighbors. That's of the bank, so it's easy enough.
Got it. Adding it to my marching orders. Thank you.
Unless there's any objection, we'll move on to central services, facilities and operations, which are pages 5 through 10. These central services, facilities and operations cover the salaries of custodians and cleaners, part-time and substitute cleaners, new equipment, cost to maintain property and equipment, cleaning supplies, utilities, and all the concomitant utility expenses, heating, ventilation services, and even down to our filters. Any questions on these?
That the electricity has gone up so much. I thought when they closed the light bulb went off, filters go down.
I've got one. Last night at the Chris Herron event, it was completely not connected to the his topic. He made a comment about walking into the building and seeing a lot of security, and I thought to myself, great, sounds good to me. So I'm just curious on near the bottom of the page on the security, district-wide security, just a historical. That's from here to here. It's a historical question. I'm just curious if we know, Jamie, if you know why the there was such a drop from 2021-22 to 22-23?
Believe a lot of it had to do with, again, outside watching during COVID and outside additional security guards working overtime, with regard to, watching the facilities and, keeping an eye on outside activities.
So it was a sort of an artificial high then in 2021-22, and it was a return to normal or closer to normal in this current year.
Correct.
Okay, sorry. Yep, that makes sense. This is the unfortunate thing about doing this in public is you reveal all your mistakes in reading. But thank you.
I think it actually opens up really good questions against people. You know, you don't realize all the things that it takes to run a school district. You know, you certainly, the electricity, the water, these things are all part of your thought, but filters, you know, I mean, they don't use Swiffers, but there's some equivalent of a Swiffer that is, you know, these things are all, they all add up.
Question on the architect's fee. So we are okay, page 10, the architect fee. So I understand the expenditures were high in 1920. We have the bond with the heavy planning for the bond work. We also incurred fees in 21, 22 with COVID and redesigning things, and we have the ongoing bond work. But we are now, I would have thought that most of the design work, since we're in the second half, we're entering the second half of phase 2 of the bond work, that our architect fees would actually go down. But we are budgeting $145,000. So I'm curious as to why that number is so high.
The primary reason for that number going up as much as it has is our annual visual inspection that happens every 5 years. They originally were doing it, and then with COVID, they created a schedule, and we were one of the last in the schedule. Next year, we will have our large building survey, and that's roughly $62,000.
And that's done by the engineers, not the architect. Because this is architect and engineers fees, right?
Correct.
All right, so Savin will do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Great question. I had the word explain with a question mark here.
I had why with a question.
As mine. But now that you mentioned it, yes, 2019, 2020, it was at the 176 figures. That was the last time we did it.
So that, I think that was the bond.
That was the bond.
That must have been the bond. 2019, 20, you would have been planning the bond. You would have been doing the bond.
So, right?
But it could have been
Yeah.
both, but a lot of that might have been
You're right.
the bond.
It was the
That's true.
bond. Yeah.
Well, you were doing a lot of drawings for the bond.
That's a good point also. Sure. It could be an opportunity to understand the other part of it, but it's not the building. Great.
Wait, I'm so sorry. I clarify again. Forgive me. Annual visual inspection, but you're saying it wasn't done for how long?
It's every 5 years. That's the schedule that they had come up with. We do have a building inspection. That number is of $62,000, which is the second number in that line. Is typically, I think, around $10,000 or $12,000. There's a big bump for the cost to have.
If we saw the
Two different things. Just because I'm on construction steering. Every 5 years, we do an annual building condition survey. It's a written document. We're required to do it by law. And that is a very detailed document. You'll get a copy of it. It's about this thick. Every year, there is a visual inspection that is done that is more, it's not as in-depth, that updates that one that's done every 5 years. So that one that is done every 5 years will look at very detailed the condition of the roofs, the condition of the boilers, because it ties into your repair reserve. So it's set by statute. So if you should have anticipated it on your building condition survey, you cannot use the repair reserve. The repair reserve is only for unanticipated repairs. If it should have been in your building condition survey, not legally allowed to use that reserve. So this document is the working document for 5 years. And then there's a more, I mean, everyone walks the building every year. John Hall and the engineers walk the building every year and they update that 5-year plan. But there's a much more detailed inspection that goes on once every 5 years.
So this is the annual with the 5-year supplements, so to speak.
This year's annual inspection includes a lot more responsibility.
That's why
The
it's so much
5-year
higher.
and it's document.
And we will get a copy of it? Is that what you said? Thank you. I was just confused, but I got it. Thank you.
I'm going to switch over just to page 1, and it's not a specific question here, and it's not for today. But just as I look at the costs of custodians and who we have where, it can't help but feel there's a relationship between the actual footprint of these buildings to what we spend and who have the personnel there. I don't need it today, but I would be curious as a trustee to know if you can report to the entire board as to the square footage of each of our buildings. No, the entirety of the campus is about 250,000 square feet. But I'd love to see it broken down by building.
Absolutely, and I know we definitely have that.
Can I add something that I saw in the narratives that I think would be interesting is how we are compensating our custodial staff compared to surrounding districts. It would be interesting to get a read on if our salaries are competitive.
Page 5, there is a $68,500 reduction towards the bottom. So you get it. Page 5, the third line from the bottom, A1620-26100, grounds and field equipment. Just curious, that must have moved somewhere else.
We did in that particular year, there was a budget for, I believe, a lift, last year, that was purchased, and some other equipment that was purchased. This year, we didn't put any equipment into that line, which was the reduction. It was more of a not adding something than taking something and moving somewhere.
Another thing I wanted to mention, just because it's something I had mentioned really for all sections. These building supplies that you talked about keeping flat, or in this case, they're small things. It's down $600. It's flat is a cut in this world of inflation. I think it's important to note. Flat doesn't mean, oh, we'll spend the same as last year and get the same amount of stuff. No, if you're spending $500 on glue one year, you're spending $500 of this next year on glue, you're getting less glue and all the various things. And that's the trend.
Correct. And in that one equipment line that you did mention, the 68, there was equipment that was put into that. So it doesn't necessarily make it into the slide for cuts, but it was something that whether it be a Cushman piece of machinery for the field or something else. And when we sat down with the director of facilities, things that you absolutely need and things that you could maybe do without for a year or two, it was removed from there. But that there were things that were removed for the purposes of trying to maintain the budget and what we could pay.
Still things that are in here. It's not, it's less, same amount of money is less. But I think it's also worth noting, we're sitting here in a beautiful room, in a beautiful building that is extremely well maintained by our staff. But as you make these cuts, at some point it is hard to get blood from stone, say. When it does start to show, before it starts to show, and that we're not, as we make these little cuts, suddenly having kids in rooms with any chip paint or fields that are not up to snuff, or they gotta call those things. So as these trimmings happen, or even the flat of the trim, it's just a concern to find that we don't nickel and dime in those areas, but we have to look for other areas of savings and just shaving. Dr. Melnick used to talk about the gym floor here in this building. They would sand it and lacquer it. At one point he said, if we do it again, we're going to have a beautiful vaulted ceiling in the cafeteria because there will be no more floor. You'll shave the whole darn thing off. At some point you shave so much there's nothing left.
Can I just add to that? And that's the idea is right there. There are always going to be things that that are sort of big ticket items that a department's going to have, infrastructure needs. And so it really needs to be addressed on a rotating basis, right? Because if you kind of if you approach the budget as flat across all departments, right? Then what's going to happen is all these needs are going to come up at the same time. So it really is about taking like a future forward-looking view to alternate when the departments get their big ticket items filled.
I think that's important. I think, we've talked in the past about music and how that's done. That's such a great model for how to do it with other departments. I think for this year, because we kind of refer to it as the first like correction year with making these adjustments, we really did want to operate on a flat and then we feel like we'll have the luxury of next year being able to look more forward this year.
I wanted to add also, we did, while we did try to maintain there are things that were added to this that weren't in last year's budget. For instance, plywood chips for the playground, which hadn't been done for 2 years. Health and safety, it's not something we wanted to wait another year for. So while that may have been an addition, there were cuts other places, but there were also things taking into account items that need to be addressed. Certain concrete work or fixing of steps, some was taken out because we could maybe postpone it a year, but others were put in that we knew we couldn't for safety reasons and just maintaining the facilities.
I just wanted to endorse all that. I also was worried, that was a good line to point out. I was worried that we not create new vulnerabilities by trying to cut so close to the bone. But I did wanted to, I think we're, I wanted to ask one thing that as in the narrative, it's mentioned on page 12 that a future need is charging station infrastructure for electric buses, which I was thrilled to see there. It's sort of the whole concept has kind of fallen off the radar as we've really had to, again, take a really sharp look at everything. But I noticed, and I guess we'll actually get to this. I just realized we're not in transportation, we're in facilities. I can wait and hold it off for that. Or finish.
I think finish.
Sorry,
You're here.
I'm sorry. I saw it again reflected in the 5-year projection too, that, we don't seem to be reflecting an expectation that I think would be a reasonable one, that the state is going to mandate that we move to electric buses. And again, this year, we're not budgeting for any replacement buses, right? So, but I'm out of turn. I'm so sorry.
Lisa?
I can dovetail on sort of that forward thinking that had to do with the overall narratives of non-instructional, and it relates a little bit to environment and environmental bond act, which I think it would be interesting to start investigating now if there are grants available. If we have 1950s septic systems, and we are a harborside community, so there are grants available in Nassau County for updating septic systems. And in fact, if we are creating nitrogen pollution actively, and I'm not suggesting that we definitely are, but if we have failing septic, then we might be eligible for some significant amount of money to help remediate those elderly septic systems. And I don't see a reason to wait until looking into what could be available for that. And also, I don't know if everyone in the community gets to see this list in the narratives of what our infrastructure needs are, but when you're looking at going into a period of prosperity and you see there's extensive needs. I know that we are talking about cap reserves and mobilizing money, and it could get a little bit confusing for the community to put on this upcoming ballot infrastructure cap reserve, given the plans for mobilizing money that are in aging cap reserves. But I definitely, for next year, I would love to see a cap reserve created for some of these infrastructure needs, because without it, I don't know how we're going to be pointing buildings and there's wall reinforcements. I live in Seacliff. I know how expensive that it's surprisingly expensive to do all this kind of stuff. So I just wanted to kind of do some of that.
I will segue to plant maintenance. This part of the budget, just page 11. This part of the budget covers the salaries of the district's maintenance staff. They're currently maintainers in the district, and they work cooperatively with the custodial staff to ensure that the district's plant and equipment are running smoothly to prevent unexpected breakdowns. They are usually proficient in several areas of maintenance, including plumbing, HVAC, carpentry, masonry, and electrical. Questions on this one?
A follow-up on Lisa's point. I just want to make sure before we start talking about septic systems, that any of that goes through construction steering, because you don't want to open up a can of worms that we don't have for. So, that's a very fine line when you're talking about systems of that nature. I think that one, we have some insurance on some of the underground oil tank septic systems. But before we start with the grant money, I think we need to talk to Savin and legal counsel on those issues.
Projects, some of which were actually identified in the 2016 capital reserve. So I think they're both good points. We don't want to, or make an argument that they have to replace because they're failing. But the idea of being aware of what's available out there when we do, through the proper process, determine that it is time to go for them, certainly supplementing our necessary efforts once they're determined to be necessary with other funds is a boon.
I certainly wasn't suggesting that they are definitely failing. I mostly was making a theoretical case for potential grant money in theory.
I
Yeah.
understood that.
And
I'm
your point
just
is well
saying
taken
that,
as well. I just wanted to clarify.
We lost our trustee who went to retirement, who loved talking about septic systems, but we carried the torch. We will move on, if that's okay with everyone, to page 12 and page 12, which is commercial insurance and BOCES administration. The district's general and commercial liabilities, as well as BOCES administrative and capital costs, are expected to increase between 10 to 12% next year. The district is a member of the New York Schools Insurance Reciprocal and experiences some protection from high costs in the commercial insurance market. But this year, the business office was informed by NYSER to expect higher increases next year due to storm-related and cyber claims nationwide. The BOCES costs are determined by Nassau BOCES, and the increases are mainly due to the rising cost of health insurance, which are passed on to all component districts. My first question is, my only question on this page is, there is a pretty substantial bump in the unallocated insurance, and while we see the breakdown of where that's going this year, the 594,000, it's hard to understand where the bump is from last year of about 101,000. So I don't know if that's something that you can speak to off the fly on that one.
I will try. One of the big increases in that is the cybersecurity insurance. Last year, that was roughly a $30,000 increase from last year, an unexpected increase from last year to this year. I think our cybersecurity insurance last year was about $17,000, and it went up to $48,000. And from what I've been told, we were lucky to, not for any particular reason with North Shore, but it's very difficult to get cybersecurity insurance, and with the claims that have been put out and schools and other businesses having been hacked or attacked. So we were fortunate that numerous questionnaires that are filled out by the technology department, and we did get the insurance, and right now they're shopping to possibly see if we can get that lower, but we were kind of fallen, I had no choice. And we're hoping to get that number to stay the same or lower, but that was a big cost.
It's a real thing. We all saw what the county Suffolk went through. $48,000 is a hedge against that. Well, obviously 47 is a better number, even like 46. That's in this environment.
this year than my cybersecurity fees. I just think it's across the board. I don't think, and we never had a claim.
When you do, I mean, there's a lot of talk in Suffolk County that I've only read this from the papers, that there's talk that they wish they had maybe paid the ransom. They don't. Oh.
I work for the county. There's still email issues. I happen to be in a situation of trying to sell a house in Suffolk County, and it's been disastrous. It really is still very much.
I mean,
There are records that are just gone forever, just gone, and they are, letting people turn in like things like certificates of occupancy don't exist anymore. If you happen to have one in your own files, bring it in and we'll scan it. Pretty bad.
No, please.
I was going to say the other major increase is some of the nicer insurance that we have, which includes the boiler and machinery, which lower, but also the commercial insurance. All of those have gone up 15%. So that too played a lot in part to that $100,000 increase.
I'm not going to obviously be on this dais talking about the insurance industry in general, but I would simply say that outlays from the industry are recouped in future years. That's a clear. Insurance and BOCES administration?
Just a comment that this feels like a good time, even though it's a small example of it, but the narratives that are throughout, both these summary ones and of course the very lengthy ones at the beginning are just wonderful. I just want to thank you for the effort made on those to be reminded constantly to have the detail and they're incredibly well written besides. So, thank you, Jane.
Certainly a testament to all the directors and administrators that put all that together.
Tremendous effort. Really grateful for it.
I should mention, as I just switched my form here, I'm realizing I'm going in numerical order and not numerical order. So I hope it's okay for everyone that they're all following along with some paper shifting. But I will keep going numerically and continue with instruction/supervision of instruction. The supervision of instruction budget covers the salaries of the assistant superintendent for instruction, Dr. Smythe, building principals, directors, clerical and secretarial support, professional development, instructional software, as well as expenditures to maintain their offices. The assistant superintendent for instruction, along with the building principals and directors, are the instructional leaders of the district. They translate the district's mission and the shared valued outcomes into our programs. And then the departmental narratives, the budget include specific goals for each and objective. Questions or thoughts on this section, trustees?
I brought it up last year as well. I'm just always surprised to see how expensive like the what do you call them? Like the online learning apps are. And I'm just curious whether you took another look at them this year to make sure that they're being utilized. And
Yes, we took a close look at the usage and how they're being used and actually made some cuts.
I thought the list looked shorter actually this year. Thank you.
I did want to point out, Trustee Russo mentioned the negatives at the bottom of pages, and right on page, and they are throughout the book, but right on page 13 at the bottom, you'll see grant offset of a negative $35,000 that she mentioned. So thank you.
That's Title II.
It's more. It's just not on this page.
Yeah, that's just Title II.
I have a very small point, and it's not actually a budgetary thing, but it's mentioned here in the middle of page 15. No one has to go there, but we've allocated $4,000 to purchase the high school diplomas. That is an incredibly important document. I actually know where mine is. Not some thing, but it's in a tube somewhere. But I would just say, as someone who has signed those now for a couple of years, it wouldn't be the worst thing to take a look at the design of those and see if that's something that maybe reflects anything having to do with this millennium. Just saying, there's a pine cone, So that's that. The larger thing I would like to discuss is that overall, this section is down $447,000 on a budget of $5.55 million. That is not something we've seen in budget books before. I know that that is, we're in the people business. This is reality. But I think it's worth recognizing, just taking a moment to acknowledge that those are difficult things. Chris, you grew out of that, from instruction and supervision of instruction, and ultimately that's where you reside. And these are people who, as the says, they do set the tone for our entire academic program, which of course carried out by our fantastic teachers and other personnel. But these are important folks.
I know we spoke about it last week and at the boot camps about how this budget does look different. And this is a key area. We have had some, we had one administrator leave, and we have Dr. Smythe's, a position. So we're looking at open positions and trying to find efficiencies from them, and asking some of our curriculum leaders and our leaders to take on more responsibility, and they've been great in working.
Thank you. Other comments in this section before we move forward? Onto regular instruction, which, off the top of my head, but I'm going to guess this is yes, showing the largest chunk of what we'll be discussing. Regular instruction is the largest section of the budget, says it right there, and it covers the cost of direct instruction and instructional support for the majority of North Shore students. It maintains all core instructional programs. It includes the salaries of regular classroom teachers, substitute teachers, monitors, recreation supervisors, curriculum and development work, contractual costs, equipment, supplies, and down to our textbooks. Comments or thoughts from the Miriam?
On page 18, for high school English language learners, there's a significant decrease in that number. Is that based upon the number of students that you and needing this language instruction?
Yes, and we did have contingencies built in for that in prior budget that we felt that we didn't need based on the answer to that first question.
Yeah.
A little lower down on the page, I wanted to ask, code 2110-151-904174. I do not know what DWTA regular education is, and how were we able to eliminate it? To eliminate the budget for it. We have that budgeted in 23-24. We just,
We obviously let Chris or Jamie speak, or Carol speak to it, but this section also does see some of those efficiencies.
Yeah, I think it came from our audit of our needs going forward into next year.
General question about textbooks. In terms of the allocation for textbooks, is that all for actual hard copy of books, or is part of the expense there renewing license agreements with the publishers to do, electronic web-based programs that are associated with the text themselves?
It would be a combination of those things, yes.
Trustee Colsilva?
I have a question on page 21, so I don't know.
We can
Okay.
within section we can
I don't know if you want to go through.
no, you're cool.
So 2110-401-40, the middle school state mandated expenses went down by over 18,000, and I didn't see. I might have missed it, but I didn't see a rationale for that in the narrative. And for this same line for high school went up by 6,000 or 7,000, so it made me a little, just curious.
The middle school, the only thing that was on that line was the Texas Instrument calculators, and one of the directors came up with had come up with a plan in terms of how do you utilize the current calculators we have, utilize it in the classrooms, but also having them purchase the calculators as a supply going forward. I believe in there also, and correct me if I'm wrong, was test scoring that was previously maybe done outsourced and at bringing it back into the district to save money.
It really saves money because don't you have to pay, like, when we do test scoring in school, you have to pay teachers for their time when we bring in retarded teachers to do that test scoring. Does it take money?
What we've actually started to do is use our service providers rather than bringing in the retired teachers. So we'll lose, for example, I'll take our math AIS team and we'll lose maybe 2 or 3 days of service provider instruction, but we don't then have to pay for subs or pay the retired teachers. We also find then they really get a good sense of how the kids are performing. So we can use that information to inform instruction. So it's kind of a little bit of a loss in time, but a benefit in terms of their professional learning, and it's also an efficient practice.
Because I remember when we went from not doing that to using an outside service to save money, but just the reasons you were saying, we had to bring in subs, we had to bring in retired teachers, we had to pay people to do it. It was quite expensive.
That model to an outside vendor at Vista through BOCES, and then I think after the pandemic, so we didn't, use that obviously, and then we re-examined. And Carol kind of, with math testing, created that new approach and found an efficiency there. And I think, in the ELA, we're looking at that now.
I had 2 more questions. I'm sorry.
So you're on.
It's 24, 2110, 480, 97, 5,000, even with my reading list. Like, so high school English textbooks, I noticed a reference to Noodle Tools, which I think answers Rich's question too. Noodle Tools was part of this for English, but I also noticed in the social studies section, they mentioned Noodle Tools as well. And I was just wondering, do we have to buy it separately, or in the social studies section, is that included in this line then?
Yes,
Okay.
we have one license and it's used across for, it's basically a tool to help kids with the research process.
It looked very interesting. Okay, great. And then my only other question here was also in the narrative, I noticed in the secondary ELA, we talked about the newly formed, or chief, I should say, I didn't talk about it, the reading instruction study group, which again sounds wonderful. And so she said if we need supporting materials for that, she'd need to re-examine whether she would be able to support it with the current budget. So, I mean, I love this idea. I want to support it now before we get to the to next year and realize we can't support it. So are we, do we have enough allocated here to support the program?
Sure. So I think what we think, so the group is really doing a lot of good work around the science of reading. We actually just had a planning meeting today. And our initial goal will be around professional learning before we move to purchase of materials. So you'll see that reflected in the literacy professional development. So we really want to make sure our teachers have that opportunity to learn before we kind of move quickly to purchase any materials.
In terms of materials, though, one thing I could see early on, and this is just, foreshadowing, but, we do a lot money for leveled books. And one of the changes that we're seeing in the science of reading is looking at decodable books instead. So a different style that really reinforces, phonemic awareness in a new way than we've been doing. So it could be just a matter of a swap.
I also just want to say thank you. I have to mimic Maria's sentiments about just all of the information in the narrative was really helpful. And I really appreciate how even facilities lists our SVOs and includes them in the narrative. I love that field trips are a priority and included in each of the schools' budget. So, and I do get nervous when we cut things like textbooks or library books. I love the performing arts and the music, the rotating schedule that was mentioned. I think, we need that for facilities, obviously, but we need that for textbooks and library books. And, I just want to make sure that And, you know, I appreciate we have to be cognizant of the taxpayer too. We just want to make sure that we have ourselves covered for the future as well.
I think the rotating concept is such a like an innovative way to marry the need to maintain with the need to find efficiency. So we're really, you know, in addition to finding new sources of revenue, I think that new look at how to rotate, you know, an emphasis on something is something we're definitely doing.
Can I just piggyback? I also picked up, and I'm not able to find it right now in my notes, despite the overuse of Post-its to try and mark everything I wanted to talk about or found interesting. I noticed that there was a really fascinating and emphatic discussion about the high school reading lab, and I was interested in trying to encourage more usage. Only 25% of kids, if I'm reading the stats right, are using it. Of those 40% of them were seniors. This is from my memory because I couldn't find it. And they're using, but there was so much there, and there was so much energy behind the description of it. So I'm hopeful that we can try and capture more students to take advantage of this investment.
Julie Ritter's really done a great job with, you know, doing innovative things in the lab, and I think she's continuously trying to bring kids in. And one thing she's used this year is even contests to get kids to become part of it. So always looking for ways to bring kids in.
Could just use that as a quick opportunity. On the flip side, one thing that we talked to Mr. Contreras a lot about, Mr. Neal, some parents about the math lab. And we had a TA running it for a long time, but that might go back to the code that Trustee Moscow was referring to, district-wide TA. And so I do want to ensure parents who are listening that we are looking at a way to meet that need. You know, we talked about a writing lab approach to the math lab, but it is different. So we are looking at when we staff courses and make sections, maybe how to build that into our existing staff.
But that's very different than the writing center. I mean, that, you know, that is also student staff, but it's very different helping someone with their writing than helping someone to teach math. It's a different game altogether.
So when I was looking through this section, I kept thinking about the achievement reports that we saw and how it all sort of fit together. And I remember when we had the science achievement report, we were looking at the outcome data. It was all really good, right? Like students across all the subgroups were doing great in science. So I know for many years there's been talk about increasing, like a real desire of the community to increase the STEM program, particularly at the elementary school level. And I know that we have sort of increased it over the last year or two with the COVID money. And I'm just curious next year what that's going to look like.
So we increased our elementary STEAM from 2 teachers to 2.4 teachers, and that's maintained in this budget.
Just going back to textbooks for 1 minute on page 24, the line for middle school math textbooks has a dramatic drop. I thought that was interesting. Is that looks like that is a move from paper to digital?
I believe it's actually just because we're not looking to purchase any new textbooks at this point. We have what we have in place.
Oh, great. Okay. That was easy. One more while I'm at it on page 25. I was just struck by the big discrepancy in copier lease costs between the schools, and I was wondering if that actually just has to do with the sheer number of machines being higher in the middle school and the high school. And I wonder if we need that many. It seems really high.
Yeah, it is the number of faculty in the middle school and the high school is significantly larger, and so you need multiple machines in order to make it work.
Other comments on regular instruction?
You need to try and go paperless.
Right. That's partly what I'm
Slowly
thinking.
but surely. I would also mention on the same page 25, the big takeaway number here is that in the budget in this section of $39+ million, the increase is $555,000. That's about a 1.4% increase, which is much lower than the overall increase. Now, granted, benefits are a huge piece that does go directly to our people, obviously. Although our employees are also footing part of that bill as well, for that. But that is also different in this budget. I'm saying it, we are a people business, and to have that rate of increase outpaced by the overall increase by these other factors that are put upon us, as you said, those how did you put it in your the 10 the stressors on the budget, or the driving factors?
Budget pressures.
Budget pressures. Yeah. They're real. Okay. We will move on to special ed, which is pages 26 through 29. The district, of course, is required to provide all residents with disabilities a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment to comply with each student's IEP, or individual education plan. This budget supports the salaries of all special ed teachers, speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, teacher assistants, and teacher aides, as well as tuition for students placed outside the district and resources to comply with the IEPs of these students. So were there questions, 26 or 29? The only thing I would say as we all get settled in here is, I think it's important to reinforce that these are driven by each individual student's IEPs and what the anticipated requirements are for those students. It's not just a number thrown out there based on previous things. It's based on, young learner X and young learner Y and whatever it is that they need, based on those IEPs, to give them what they need. And I think that's something that this district prided itself on recognizing, not just recognizing that every student has an equal right to the highest level of free and appropriate public education that they can get, but that all of our students experience the beauty of a North Shore education as much as possible, and reducing any inequities that exist. So this budget, I know, reflects that and is based on those individual students. And that's why you see ups and downs in schools and buildings. It's all over the place because, one or two students can really change the need in a particular building. So that's my overview. Any specific questions that folks may have?
To add that since I praised the written narratives, that your verbal narratives on top of them, Dave, are usually also incredible. I mean, that was a perfect explanation of what could have been a really obvious question. Why is this building going up and the other one's going down? It's completely individualized.
I think it's important to highlight that because
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their own needs, and that's a lot to take. Other questions on special ed?
I was worried about the one contingency position, particularly because it's we're budgeting so much less than the average of that these schools typically cost, and of course it could be right that we need it not for a full year, but I just never want to be in a situation where we're reluctant to provide the placement because we haven't budgeted for it.
And the contingencies that are in here were the same that were in here in the previous year, so we didn't change them or lower them. But it's always a concern because you don't know what happens from one month to the next in terms of what could.
Jamie, just from one month to the next, students' needs can change.
Either way, right? Either way.
Of course.
Similarly, we discussed English language learners before, math AIS, literacy AIS, and RTI services. That those are always moving, so that we're always watching them.
I kept thinking about this in terms of the achievement reports and the subgroups, right? So when you see a particular group in whatever subject or whatever level that's not performing equitably, right? You have to ask yourself, is this in part because of some type of budgeting issue that we failed to provide, right? And so I just hope that we have enough in here for students who are vulnerable, who require a lot of services?
We believe we do, but I think we also you have to continually look at things like time, things like what you've allocated and how are you working with that throughout the year. We do have budgets for things like overages, special education, ENL, and those things I mentioned. We do have overages budgeted if we need them, and we utilize them usually for those three areas.
Should be noted, I think we actually do a really good job at not making, like fulfilling our legal obligation to these students, where I don't necessarily think neighboring districts come at it in the same way.
Do you think we meet individual students? And we're very sensitive to that. I think I probably share the conversation that I had with Mr. Contreras and Mr. Doherty being on the phone for over an hour trying to figure out how to get one senior into a class so that they could graduate with everything they need based on the decision they made, and we made it work. That's the mentality.
It is, yeah.
Not a budgetary thing, but I think it's also very worth noting that we have a great partner in the SEPTA community and the parents and the advocates who recognize that we're in this together to help the individual students and bring a tremendous amount to the table in terms of knowledge and in terms of time and in terms of service to all students in this community. Obviously, I think people get involved in SEPTA primarily because of their own experience, but pretty soon when you become enmeshed in that SEPTA community, you realize that part of what you can contribute is to help parents of younger kids just coming into the system, and they do that, and it's very supportive and very informational, and I know they relate very well to the administration and vice versa. So I think that's really important to mention. I will move on to the next section, which is St. Christopher's on page 29. North Shore School District is responsible for the education and transportation of up to 6 school-aged children placed in the St. Christopher residential facility located within the district's geographical borders. There are currently 5 students attending BOCES programs at a private school. All costs incurred by North Shore are reimbursed by the students' home districts. And just as we explain every year, we experience these costs on the expense side. They are offset elsewhere in our revenue side. So whether they send us 3 kids, as they've done in some years, they send 3 kids there that are covered, but then because of our geography, or 4 or 5 or 6, it all is a wash, but it's recognized in this place. It's worth noting there are those 5 students, and again, they all have slightly different dollar amounts based on those student needs, and that is up from last year, and will be reimbursed for it.
Yes, correct. And as we talked about, the changes, in particular with this section, while we were doing the budget, we would put it together, and then there are 2 that are listed as new students. And just when we were all done, then we learned we had 2 new students, and another student came off. So it's a continually shifting as we go through the process. So just when we thought we had it right, we said, oh, we've got 2 more students, and then
A lot of phone calls to Director Marino in a 5-minute period there.
I will move on to other instruction, occupational and continuing ed. The budget covers tuition for vocational education, evening adult education program, and the cost of our summer remedial programs for high school students. It is anticipated that 33 11th and 12th graders will enroll in vocational programs in 2023-2024. It is also anticipated that 5 students will enroll in the Long Island High School for the Arts. The North Shore Schools Adult Education Department provides a variety of educational opportunities to residents, including musical groups and exercise class, and that is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what they offer as we've discussed here. Comments or thoughts in this section?
I
Marianne?
have a comment. So when Dr. Melnick was the superintendent, we never ever paid for the Long Island School of Performing Arts because we have such a strong performing arts program here and because it's highly recognized. The exception was made for a student who was moving into the district where we didn't have a particular program. I would like us to revisit sending kids to the high school, Long Island High School, for the fine performing arts. I really feel that we have an outstanding program here. We offer things way beyond other districts. The group lessons, the dance program, um, and I would, I would encourage students to take advantage of some of the BOCES programs. It actually costs a lot more money for us to send a child to BOCES than it costs, just to keep someone in regular education. But I do feel that in a time when we're cutting teaching positions that affect hundreds potentially of students, that to spend twice what it costs us to keep a student in-house when we have such a strong program, I don't think that should be allowed.
We've discussed a lot about tuition paying students coming into our district, but similarly we have to look at how do we keep our students here when we can, when we do have that. And I totally agree. I think our arts program is second to none, and now with the addition, the filling out of dance and a space for dance too, we really do have a lot of options. And this is part of a larger discussion that Carol and I are having with Mr. Contreras and Mr. Doherty about looking at how we offer courses at the high school around student-driven concentrations that relate to majors in college, careers outside of high school. And so we do feel like those discussions are happening, and we agree.
And I would like us to think about in the future to avoid this situation, talking about reinforcing the parts of our fine and performing arts program. We touched on it in old and new business one night. I can't remember. It was late. It was like midnight. About the lighting design, the sound design, the stagecraft portion. And if we really want to be a premier fine and performing arts district, we need to strengthen those areas. And there are ways to do that at very little cost. You have LIU, who has a fine and performing arts program that does a lot of that backstage kind of work. You have Hofstra that has a great fine and performing arts program, and you can get college students to come in and do some of this work and give them college credit at no cost to us. So there are resources right here in this area that we can utilize at no cost to the district to further bolster our program.
Thank you, Mary, and I agree as well about the strength of our current arts program. Obviously, without areas for continued improvement, but the idea of being able to have those students with those talents be part of their local community and get the benefit of North Shore education overall is something that I would like to be able to increase going forward. Absolutely.
Should be noted that that particular program is very different than a program that would be needed for a special education student.
I think it's also different. This is one of my questions, is to maybe give some examples of BOCES, but we don't have some of the things that BOCES offers that are incredibly important for those students. And I certainly wouldn't want to limit those opportunities for those students.
Oh, like the career technical education. No, that's a totally
No.
different type of thing.
That was
Yeah.
a differentiation I
Oh,
was
no,
making.
we're all in agreement there. I think that
I just didn't want making that differentiation.
Yeah, no, I heard.
If we don't offer something, by all means,
yes,
right?
yes.
All
The goal is to be able to whatever these 200 and 220 kids in a class need to get the best of those years. The only chance they have at being that age, we want to be able to offer it to them. And certainly, many of those career BOCES programs we don't offer here, and we need to make sure that those students have those because that's there's value in that. It's right for those students, and we want to support that. But as Marianne said, a lot of what goes on at the School of the Arts, we can provide here. I also want to say, Chris, another example, Marion asked a question and you have thoughts about it that I never heard before. Like, I'm impressed that you're ahead of it.
It started a couple of years ago. Dolly and I were talking about majors in high school, like that concept, and then Eric and I have talked about it. I think the stage arts idea, I like communications, and again, it's we look at the audit, the course audit. It's about where do we have redundancies, and where can we create new opportunities with what we already have.
Fresh eye and that looking ahead, vision of where we're going to be in the future. Financial piece is such a huge part of that. But no matter what your finances are, if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. And with that, we're going to move on from this section, I believe. Talk about library and audiovisual, the budget for which supports library programs, including library books, online databases, video conferencing software, audiovisual support for large groups, including parents and Board of Ed meetings. It also includes the budget for loan library materials to the Greenvale School, which is located within our borders. The state reimburses the district for the cost of the library loan program. Elsewhere, each school district in New York State is allotted a maximum of but in general, it's worth noting the Greenvale School is the only private school located within the My only comment would be we are spending a lot of money on revamping our media spaces at the elementary schools. The middle school is finished and the high school is not. The concept of being, hope it doesn't sound the wrong way, but the concept of being house poor is not one you want to be in, where you have you build a beautiful mansion and then you fill it with like your college furniture, and that I think is a good analogy to where the concern I would have about books, and about supplying these new facilities with not just new books, but great books for our kids. I think we all know that we are living in a technological world. We want to reduce copiers, but for those young learners, the feel of a book and printed words on a page is something that has advanced Western, really all civilization for centuries, and we want to support that. So I hope this budget continues to. We are flat in that area. Flat is a de facto shaving, so that's a priority for me. Technology. The technology budget supports 1 director of technology, 2 computer technicians, 4 computer aides, 1 secretary, and 3 outsourced computer technicians. Nassau BOCES provides network engineering support. Student management system, instructional, financial, and cafeteria point-of-sale system software are all hosted off-site. The budget includes plans to continue to enhance cloud data backup services, replace aging Chromebooks on a rolling basis, and start phase 2 installation of smart panels. Refer to the attached detailed narrative for a comprehensive report, and it was comprehensive, from the technology department and future plans to upgrade the district's technological infrastructure. Comments or thoughts on pages 33 through 35, technology? We're getting there, guys.
Do have a question about at the bottom of page 33, the replacement of Chromebooks, and I feel like I should know this, but what's CBT?
It's computer-based testing. I wish I didn't know what that's the.
I saw it a few
There's-
times and I knew it, but I couldn't figure it. Okay. So this line is for incoming kindergartners, and I know we had talked about the need of Chromebooks for our youngest learners. We used to give them to 5th graders. Obviously, the pandemic happened, and we started to give them to all students. And I know there are a lot of concerns about screen time and about, we're talking about the printed word and books and just, tactile learning for our youngest students. So I'm just wondering if we've thought about that and if that's an absolute necessity for the kindergarten.
I know we've probably all heard the story about why do all the Silicon Valley executives have their kids go to Waldorf and Montessori schools with no technology, and it's true. And I think we talked about this at the PTO president's meeting a couple of weeks ago. We were in kind of crisis mode, and we were set up. And so now we kind of have to take ourselves off of that ramp. Carol and I are going to be meeting with the principals talking about Chromebook use, electronic learning use, and how we kind of scale off of it in a meaningful way, and set some parameters too. So that could possibly affect how this is spent coming year.
I'm happy to hear that. Like, I'm really glad that you guys are on top of that because we know that kids learn best with play, and when they're exposed to all that screen time, sometimes like, just colored blocks don't look as exciting. So, hear that. And in terms of assistive technology at kindergarten, you wouldn't even really be using it for somebody who had a learning disability, right? It's too young. So, I think it's a good idea.
I agree with looking at it as well. I just wanted to remark that of all the narratives, I loved all the narratives, but I found this one to be so informative and really every question I had, it was right there in terms of, you know, the one-to-one that we're providing. And I thought that this narrative was just really informative. And I was struck with how expensive cybersecurity is, but how much of an investment we're making to really be forward thinking about our data and keeping it safe, and that it is such a driver of the bulk of this budget. And it's a necessary evil, but I thought that it was really well written and explained.
I had a question. First, I thank you, Lisa. I was going to ask that same question. I totally agree. These little kids do not need to be on the phone or the Chromebook. But with the rise in the use of the Chromebooks and phones and things of that nature, how are we monitoring at the higher levels of the cheating? Big problem.
I'm concerned about it. You know, we're hearing, you know, that is a concern across districts, and we are looking in line with what, you know, the last question at cell phone policies too. I visited a neighboring district last year on a tri-state visit, and a very simple mechanism that they had in the high school classrooms, like a wall with pockets with phones, and you put your phone in. And actually, when you were speaking, Andrea, before, I was thinking, you know, it's the use at the younger levels and it's the distraction at the higher levels, even in the moment. And I've seen it in high school classrooms, and I think post-COVID now, you know, moving out of an era, I think we were afraid to tackle it a little bit as we were first coming back. And it's kind of for some students, a security blanket, I think a real, so we want to really look at the cell phone use in classes. You know, I have not had active discussions with the principals yet, but the 5 principals are going to sit down and look at policies.
And Garden City at French's teaches there, and when they walk in her classroom, they have to put their cell phone in the bucket.
We have teachers who do that too. I've been in those classrooms, so I would love for all of them to do that. It's, you know, obviously I'm a professor and it's a really big issue. But I actually read a lot of research on it, and it shows even if you shut the cell phone off, like if that's the rule, but it's on the table, it's still actually an enormous distraction and impacts learning. It has to physically be put away. So in my class, at the first day, everyone gets a manila envelope, and you put your phone in the manila envelope. And if you do that, you get extra credit. So it's not a punishment, but it's an incentive. And if you have some type of an emergency that, you know, your mother's in the hospital or whatever, you're entitled to leave it out. You just don't get the extra credit.
I do think that's a good point, because I think one thing, when we start to work on that, we will have some concerned parents say, well, I need to reach my child, and you know, we'll work around and ensure that will always be an option.
A million years ago, you had a problem and you need to reach your child, you called the front office, and miraculously someone would pick up the phone and they'd say, okay, Mrs. Russo, I'll go down and get Katie or Michael and let them know there's an issue.
I'm assuming we still have people in the front office.
Still have
You know,
landlines.
could be a
Sure, still-
crazy idea.
It is true. Although I will tell you very honestly, I thought I lost my phone after the Chris Herron presentation. I was in a white hot panic last night. I've been looking under the chairs, and I mean it's we all have a connection to our phone, not just so. But it's a good point. The other technology points before we move on to other instruction, health and guidance. The other instruction budget supports attendance, guidance, and health departments. The attendance budget covers half the salary of the district registrar and expenditure for residency searches. Guidance counselors, school social workers, and psychologists work closely with students to develop both academic, career, and social emotional skills. The social and emotional needs of our students are more important than ever. This budget supports the continued expansion of the partnership with the Family and Children's Association of LICAD, student assistance programs. The health budget covers the salaries of 8 full-time nurses who do amazing work. The health budget also includes medical director services, new employee physicals, a 0.5 full-time clerical support, substitute nurses, reimburses for health service for resident students attending private and parochial school.
A question in the narrative. Several times it was mentioned that we're saving $8,000 by not requiring the PSAT during the week. And it was sort of touted as a cost savings. I was a little concerned about that in terms of like the equity piece, because I do worry that making it optional on the weekend, there are a lot of children who are not going to take it and have that familiarity, and then it impacts their ability. I mean, as a district, don't we want everyone to have familiarity with this test, right? We know the more time on task, the better you're going to do. And there might be families, people who might not be able to push their kids to take it or understand the importance of this test. So to me, like that was not a place to save money. I don't know what your
The way
thoughts.
every other district does it. They all do it on the weekend.
Yeah, so it really, I think, was more about the logistical concerns, the decision, because of the loss of instruction for the school day with proctoring, and it really impacted the other grades. So we were weighing it against that as well. But, and it is how every district does it. But I totally hear what you were saying. Dan and I have had this conversation a lot since, we both started in those roles in 2019. And I do worry about the access when you have it as an assured experience, like we've talked about, like Carol talked about with a lot of the programs at the elementary level. So we are going to continue to look at that. How do we keep it as an assured experience, perhaps for a smaller number?
Question on page 39. Just to confirm, the psychologists and the social workers, this is district-wide, these 17 positions. That, yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. I think it's worth noting at the presentation last night. There was a comment made about, we need a wellness class, and I thought I understood the point, but I think for me and what I've learned from sitting up here and from having students who've gone through this district, wellness is not a set aside. It's not an isolated discrete event. It's something that should be infiltrating every aspect of what we do. And so having these district-wide personnel to support that and the mission of what we're trying to accomplish overall is something that needs to be embedded in every corner. And so that's what this supports. If I'm not mistaken. That said, it's a $4.7+ million budget section that has an increase of $160,000. So that's I haven't done the math here, but that's probably even a lower percentage. Some other areas. So I thought the larger takeaway of what he was saying was that the student wellness and prevention and the concept of a first day and when things start and maybe start to go south is a heck of a lot better and easier to address than down the road. So this is an area that I think needs continued strong support. Well,
Can I add on to that?
please.
So our district should be really proud, right? $2 million are spent on psychologists and social workers in this district, right? That's how much we value mental health care here. And if you look across the nation, the number one place children get mental health services is in the school, right? So we are providing a very essential service to children during the day that they might not otherwise have access to during a national mental health crisis. So I think this is great, and it shows that even during tough fiscal times, we continue to invest in this area.
The reason I brought it up was just to really unequivocally stress my support for this area. Okay. Thoughts on this section? The co-curricular and interscholastic athletic programs are an important component of the complete North Shore educational program. I should mention last for tonight. There's only
Oh,
part
transportation.
one. Transportation. Oh, yes. I think it's out of order on the sheet. Thank you.
There's
Yeah,
transportation.
it's up. It's like exactly. And actually, I have some comments on transportation. Looking forward to it. No. But in the larger picture, this is what we're doing tonight is only half of the budget review, or some percentage. Yeah, it may be. Co-curricular and interscholastic athletic programs are an important component of the complete North Shore educational program. Each and every student is encouraged to take advantage of the numerous programs that are offered to students throughout the district, kindergarten through high school. This budget covers intramural programs district-wide, coaching salaries, supervision of athletic events, playoff pay, team uniforms, new equipment, training devices, reconditioning of safety equipment, rental of pools and bowling alleys, invitational fees, video technologies, athletic trainer and medical coverage. Nassau BOCES is the ruling body of interscholastic athletics. The fees below cover officiating expenses, scheduling of games, championship venues, of which we've been lucky to participate, video programming, and the district share of the day-to-day operation expenses of Section 8. Comments or questions on these?
Have one.
Yes, please.
Page 41. The interscholastic supplies. So that's where uniforms, I think, fall under according to the narrative. And I just want to make sure it's only an increase of $1,860. We've heard from the community about uniforms, and I just want to make sure we are allocating enough in there so that our athletes have the uniforms they need.
Great question. Mr. Lang and I have spoken a lot about uniforms this year. We're doing a spring uniform update. He just proactively called me about that the other day, and we're supporting him in that. And so I think two things here. There that cycle approach. I think it's a tighter cycle. You need to replace those. We've also moved more to sublimated uniforms, which are easier to replace, meaning that you don't need a full set when you lose a uniform or there's a tear, and when you don't have to replace a full set, it can just be screened on, and it's much more cost effective and easier to replace quickly. So that's one thing. The other thing is sometimes when there are fund balances within the other balances, we will use that. You can move that for uniforms if that comes up, and that is in fact one thing that we fill into this year.
Same for safety equipment. I think that's also in there, especially, given the Hamlin and the climate that we're in, and just, making sure that we have the most up to date and most effective safety equipment that there is.
And in fact, we are posing the addition of, we do contract out for our athletic trainer, an additional part-time athletic trainer in that vein. And so in addition to the resources and safety equipment, that trainer we think will help cover, our junior high school, also provide some support to our middle school students.
This part of the budget, do you ever look at it from the lens of gender equity, or to make sure that we're funding girl, women's, boy, men's sports equally?
Yes, we do, and I know, kind of as a carryover, we did the boards through the board support added some coaching positions, and we did look at those. I know definitely through that lens. Similarly, when we look at clubs and new clubs, we have had a lot of new clubs that support student interest, but also students' unique ethnic identities or other identities, and so that's been supported in that way too. But that is a conversation, continuing conversation. We talked a lot this year about new intramurals. I won't say I'll say badminton. I'll say the badminton one again. Making sure that there is equity amongst those newer clubs and athletic opportunities that we're at.
The district's been responsive. The cheerleading team is a pretty new thing, and there's a lot
Making sure, was, I had spoken the last time, I don't know if it was here or at the athletic advisory about there were some, you know, grants you get for the Nike or Under Armour shirts that protect against injury for hit to the midsection. So I know most students purchase that themselves. I was wondering if you followed up with Mr. Lang about getting some grant money, because there may be students, they're quite expensive, who can't afford that, and are we making sure that students who can't fund themselves their own safety equipment have the proper equipment, not only something of that nature, but the proper footwear. Footwear is very important, especially when you're playing on a turf field, having, turf shoes.
Yeah, no, that is a great point. I do think where we live, it's kind of assumed that students will get some of this stuff on their own, and it's just, and we need to look at that. And so I will follow up with Mr. Lang on that, in grants or where we can fund that, and injuries. I know footwear has become very prominent in research and data on injuries, especially lower body tears and things like that.
I mean, you shouldn't always wear a cleat on a turf field. You should be wearing a turf shoe unless it was raining. So things of that nature, footwear is really important for athletes.
just go back a page and just say that I see the chaperone costs for Frost Valley, Philadelphia, and Boston. Fantastic if those trips are able to go off again. Great experiences. Our middle school in general can be tricky years, and bringing the students together on those sorts of trips is fantastic. So I certainly support that. I think it's also worth mentioning for the public how chaperoning costs work legally. Chaperone costs for assured experiences for all of our students. Every student is going on the experience. The district can cover it. Chaperones for selected groups, whether it's a music group, an exchange program, Costa Rica trip, etc. When those are only available to those students who are participating, then those chaperone costs are set by the district and ultimately the teacher's contract, but those have to be reimbursed by the specific participants. Is that a fair summary? Or
Yes, that is. Jamie actually just wrote a memo on this, because then we have for daily trips too. There are some other considerations. Sorry, Jamie.
Not at all. Correct. Yeah, those groups that are going on those, it will be part of the breakdown of costs and then divided among the individuals attending the trip.
If the kids go to see a play in the city, the entire English class goes, or the entire Mandarin class goes. That's covered by the district. That's the other line here.
Yes, depending on the trip and what it is.
Educational nature of the trip. If it's part of the curriculum, then we have to legally cover it.
Section, co-curricular and athletics.
All right. For high school club other expenses, I'm just looking at the numbers. It kind of jumps from year to year, and it doesn't really give detail. Is this money for entry fees, for competitions, that sort of thing? What I just don't know what the other expenses would be.
I do believe so. Any kind of mandated expenses for fees for clubs, which could be entry fees, registration fees for as part of the national organization, things like that. And so what we can do is in our next backup kind of look at what has been paid out of that and just get more finer grained detail on that. I know that there was a dip in that COVID year, but also it is lower. You're right. In the past 2 years was a difference there. So we'll provide specifics on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Transportation. Truck on over to this new section. The district provides transportation for kindergarten through 12th grade for North Shore students who live more than 3/4 of a mile from school. Jamie, I don't know if you get to use the roller measurer yet.
I have not.
Okay, well, I'm sure you will. These services are provided on district-owned school buses and by district employees. Students attending private and parochial schools who live within 15 miles of their homes, I assume that means the parochial schools are situated within 15 miles of where the students live, are entitled to transportation if their request is submitted by April 1st of each year. The district does not accept late submissions. Unless it is submitted by a new resident. Students with disabilities are entitled to suitable transportation as specified in their IEPs for up to 50 miles from their homes. This budget supports the salaries of 33 part-time bus drivers, 3 mechanics, 1 transportation supervisor, 2 bus dispatchers, 5 monitors, as well as supplies, fuel, parts, and insurance for the buses. The budget also supports contracts with private companies for the remainder of the bus routes. Any comments on this section? I would simply mention that if we're looking for revenue opportunities, I've been saying it, we own the bus depot, we service other district vehicles. There's an opportunity there. I know one of the things Chris had talked about at the budget coffee, which I attended recently, was the idea of a revenue committee. It's an idea, not mine.
I also want to credit Mr. Price, who spoke at our last public comment, and we're really excited about it. It's something internally we've been talking about, so we are going to get some folks together this spring.
And the other question I had was at the bottom of page 43, the contract buses for St. Christopher's and other transportation. That is all part of that reimbursement on the revenue side later on.
That's correct.
It's a combination of state aid with the students, but it'll all reimbursed.
Okay.
My math that I was fooling around with before, but I think I might have gotten it right now. So transportation costs really increased, right? So the way that the 2 pages are divided, there's a 4.1% increase in transportation costs in terms of our own buses, right? On page 42, correct? But then what I did is I looked at page 43, right? And 43 is transportation of students to other schools or contracted transportation, right? And it's late, so I could be wrong. But looking at that increase, right? Isn't that like a 45% increase?
That is correct. It is primarily a result of the addition of students from St. Christopher's and those reimbursable, but also contract transportation that has gone up.
So so think about it. Like this district was so smart to establish their own our own bus station, right? Because the increase they both have increases, right? But the increase is so much smaller on the services that we are providing. And if we were totally dependent on contracted buses, right? Can you imagine what that number would have been? That would have been another hole to dig out of.
See, maybe not. You're not looking at pension liability. You're not looking at healthcare costs. You're not looking at maintaining the facilities, repairs, I mean, there's a lot of other numbers that go in there. And if you're talking about St. Chris's, you're talking about a very particular type of transportation. There may be a monitor on it. It may be a specific type of vehicle that we don't provide. It all depends.
Interesting. Okay.
One aspect of it that is incontrovertible is that we get to control the ability to provide that transportation for our students, which proved to be such a hurdle for so many districts during the pandemic who couldn't transport not just students here and there, but even the meals that students rely on for their home, who were able to provide and carry out the wishes of the state who funded those. So having that control and having a reliable, high quality fleet of not just the machines, but the people to facilitate that is certainly something that is a benefit to have that under control.
Not too long ago that there was a bus driver shortage, right, from the strike. And it's also a way that we keep residents employed, right? So many of our bus drivers live here locally. And it's another example of how our district, right, provides jobs.
I'm just curious. I think it's I was reading this. 33 part-time bus drivers. How do pension and you know post-employment benefits work for those part-timers? Post-retirement or post ending of their career.
That's a good question. I think we were just talking about this with another unit today, so I'd want to look at their contract over again before we answer that, but we will get back to you.
It just occurred to me in the moment as we were talking about it.
Question.
Okay. Okay. That concludes.
Wait.
No, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to revisit the comments that I
Interrupt me,
made
please.
earlier
Sorry,
that
yeah.
were totally out of turn. Now we're finally on transportation.
I almost cut you off. I'm sorry.
Okay. So two things. I just wanted to wonder why we have, I think, traditionally, at least shows going back to the first three of the previous 5 years, we budget for new buses. We have not done that. We chose not to do that this year, and we're apparently choosing not to do that next year. Just wondering if we're, creating a vulnerability there that we don't want to risk.
I think last year the decision was made not to purchase a bus, but to help to finance the replacement of the gym floor, along with another transfer to the capital fund. It wasn't budgeted this year, certainly because of the fiscal constraints we have in trying to keep the budget now, and also that we're looking at the potential purchase of electric buses and other costs involved in that, and trying to figure out whether it makes sense to buy a diesel bus that will last 20 years, when in 10 years we will have to make sure that our whole fleet is electric buses, which is currently what the legislation. So this year was left off for that reason, not knowing where we will be next year in terms of that.
But isn't there a lot of controversy over the electric bus legislation? There's areas in upstate New York where the buses an electric bus can't service the geographic area. It would have to be part of the government's budget because there are going to be many, many, many districts who are not going to be able to afford that kind of change in fleet. It would increase their transportation costs if they have outside providers, because the outside providers now have to buy new vehicles. And there's also concerns about, with all these green initiatives, whether the power grid is sufficient to support it. So, I mean, it's 10 years down the road. I understand being forward looking, but it is 10 years down the road, and I don't really think it's a certainty.
Guess I'm just concerned also that we not put ourselves in a position where we suddenly, we have buses fail and aging fleet, and then suddenly we need to budget for 2 new buses in 1 year, or that this is sort of goes back to that idea of cyclical management of the fleet. In this case, I'm just wondering how we will be prepared for that.
Oh, and you make very good points. Those are things that I have heard at each of these different conferences with regard to the electric buses and where we stand in terms of our infrastructure, not just the cost of the buses, how long the buses will last. So these are all conversations that are going on now. And the intention is not to not put buses into the budget going forward, but in last year, I know it was taken out, and to keep the budget down, it was not added back in the current year.
I think this is one of those, for me, we're sort of drafting off our proactivity in past years that we do have a fleet that's been replaced frequently. So the idea of skipping a year, 2 years, maybe 3 years, maybe more, is something that is not going to put us obviously in danger because our buses still look great. I mean, you drive up and down the streets. I was driving behind a bus, not one of ours the other day, and I was truly tempted to call the number on the back of the bus. It was just spewing filth, and I was like, "Gosh, our buses are great." So we think we're still a couple of years away from that, but yes, the monitor at some point you won't be. Things go from new to old very, very quickly. Other questions to transfer, Rich?
I just have a quick one. Do we contract out for all the repairs? Because I've been looking through this and I don't see any area for salaries for mechanics, for example. So I was just wondering about that. I see the line where we contract for outside repairs, but do we do that for everything, or do we have people that are serving within the district? Maybe it's in a different line somewhere, but I didn't see it.
It's in a tiny, I think it's in a tiny little, the third line down, Rich. I don't know if here.
It's included with the
included
transportation
under
drivers.
With the
Oh,
drivers.
that's what, yes, yeah.
Oh, I didn't see that. Thank you. That's a good vision is not the strong.
No, it's,
Yeah, that would.
it is a good point. I did want to mention it in response to Trustee Mosca's comment. I think part of it, again, we do not want to go too long. I think part of what Jamie and I have talked about is like as electric buses and vehicles come up to scale where we see a decrease in costs, we hope that is the case. But also having our own facility, to Trustee Galati's point, you know, that does allow us, I think, to get more life out of our buses, also having our own account.
And before we wrap it up, I just want to ask, there's a line here for transfer to capital slash special projects. That was page 10. But when I click on it, I'm not sure that I see where specifically that is. Chris, I don't know if you can walk me through where that is. Is that just this little line, these lines here, special projects? Or is that something that is really what we're talking about?
Back in the at the beginning on page 10 in central services, there's a listing of the different schools, and in there they would typically budget for these special projects.
Okay, so it shows like
Special project.
1620 dash a point 501 dash 12345.
There hasn't been anything budgeted there for the past couple of years, with the exception of something at Glenwood Landing back in 21, 22, which I will check. There were items placed in here initially, a replacement of an elevator at Glenwood Landing that was taken out after conversations with a very large expenditure, but nothing that has been forgotten about, just not included in.
Those are building wide and not the transfer to capital that, for example, for the larger project for the turf replacement. Trustees, thank you. This was exhaustive. I'm not gonna say exhausting, I'll say exhaustive. But also I really appreciate this good work. I hope the community does too. You've all clearly contributed. We've all contributed a lot to this conversation. Thank you to the administration for this. And ultimately this is what we do. We are representing the community and looking over every one of these lines and seeing, you know, where we go and what we do. So I think that's important, and I look forward to the additional sections that we're going to be looking at our next meeting, which is going to be, gosh, it's got to be what, March 9th. Thank you. And with that, we will open it up to the public. Comments from the public. Oh, okay. I don't see anyone getting up. So we will move on to action item 10, which are personnel. Any, is there a motion on action item 10? Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna go pretty quick from here. Comments, questions? All in favor? Aye, thank you. Item 11, which is the adoption of the 23-24 school calendar. It's always fun. Is there a motion? Heard a second. Comments or questions? I was going to say, because the calendar goes through Wednesday, June 28th, there's a little more breathing room in this calendar. We're going to be starting September 6th, which is exciting, 2 days after Labor Day. So everyone can enjoy the full August as an August birthday. I always appreciated that. We get a little long, mini long weekend in March due to the way the holidays fell out this year. Still get the full week in February, still get the full week in April. So I'm feeling very good about voting yes. I will call the vote. All in favor? Aye, terrific. Action item 12, acceptance of a donation from the Cactus Cafe to the North Shore High School senior class. Is there a motion? And a second? Thank you. Comments or questions? Yeah, I'm certainly not going to comment on any, too many of our local businesses, but theoretically, if one had someone break through the window and had theft, it's really, really pretty amazing that they're willing to contribute and volunteer. So, bravo to them. And, I'm ready to approve this one as well. All in favor? Aye, thank you. Action item 13, which is the approval to dispose of inventory. Is there a motion? I heard a second. All in favor? Aye. Action 14, A and B, which are approval of an agreement between North Shore and Infinity Growth and Development, and approval of facilities use agreement between North Shore and the Roman Catholic Church of St. Rocco. Is there a motion on A and B? And I heard a second. Comments or questions?
I just wanted to follow up on some questions I had asked in email on the Infinity contract. I was pretty satisfied that there was due diligence on this, but it was just a general question to keep in mind, or a comment that I'm concerned that though this is a relatively small size, we just went through the budget. We saw that we have a very healthy contingent of in-house people that would presumably, be able to handle some of these things as well. So what persuaded me here, or is in the process of persuading me, is that you have actually you said this person actually led your leadership retreat, right?
It actually wasn't mine. It was my mentor, Superintendent Gordon City, who I work with, and she led her retreat. We're going to look at this and see if we decide to do that. But she has worked with several school districts, so her credentials are not not certified social worker or psychologist, but she has done a tremendous amount of work with these specific types of programs that she's doing, not like one-on-one counseling or like that.
I know I'm aware also that one of our social workers spoke highly of her too, having heard her directly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was my question. Was I didn't see very specific credentials that seemed to qualify.
Yeah, and that is a good question. We did talk about this. There were questions in several meetings and wellness. And the other point of you have the presenter come, and then it's like one and done, and then what happens systemically daily? How does the experience change? Every day. Is it just that's it? If they walk out and forget the experience, so we have to look at how do you carry on that experience to make it worthwhile. Also, but I do invite. To the assembly program. If you would like to come, I'll give you specific times. It is on March. It will be on March 6th, because I think that's important too. And not that you have tons of free time, you're all busy, but and if in the absence of that, me reporting back to you with specifics. I know in the past in the wellness school we've talked about how do we evaluate these folks. So we do have to get back to that. You actually seen the firsthand would be a good thing.
And I'll just add, not about this particular contract, but I do think going forward, when we have presenters in front of students who are talking about very specialized areas, that it's really important that they have like whether it's a license or certification or whatever is relevant in that situation. Because when it comes to mental health specifically, like it does sometimes kick up stuff in kids, right? And there are real specific ways to talk about these issues, and I think our community expects that the loss of educational time to one of these presentations would I don't know, I kind of feel like, you know, it's important who we put there. So, but of course that has nothing to do with this particular.
Any other comments on this before we call the vote? Okay, all in favor of 14A and B? Aye. I will take an action, a motion on 15 and 16 together, approval of a health services agreement with Uniondale and approval of our IEP. Is there a motion on 15 and 16? Comments or questions? Thank you.
I do have one, and I'm sorry, I
go
got
for it.
timed out here. I have to log back in, and I just had to look at my notes. If you give me a couple more seconds here. Sorry.
Okay.
It's item 15.
Use this moment to thank the agenda setting committee for not having committee reports.
Yes, I think this. Okay, yes, it was about the agreement with Uniondale. I just wanted to, oh, there we are, yeah. I just wanted to make sure I understood this. So it's, I think it's 15 students. And this is not for a single school in Uniondale, it's for any schools. These 15 students might be at a number of different schools, right? Sorry, probably Kellenberg, but I wondered if the way it's worded, it
Private schools, yeah, within the boundaries of, yeah, just like if somebody was attending Greenville School for us. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, this is just really to remind me that of the process. So the fact that it's coming at this point in the year is just that, is this when Uniondale do they initiate, does the School of Location or the School of Service, whatever it's called, initiate this? Hey, hey, North Shore, you got to reimburse us for these kids of yours that are here for the health fees.
Sometimes these contracts are not timely, so I think this is an example of a contract that came late.
Okay.
Yeah, from them.
But it's up to them to say.
Yes.
We have
yeah.
to.
And it does say the term is September 1st.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So, and this is going to be it for the year, though. There's not going to, presumably, in another month, that there'll be two more.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, but it is, and it does raise a question that I can look into, like, why is this coming so late? And it probably goes back to that, it's not coming from us.
Thanks, Maria. And that applies to a lot of the contracts. It's universal.
Yes, right.
Other comments or questions before we call the vote on 15 and 16? All in favor? Aye. Any unfinished business? Any new business?
New business.
Please.
And I did raise as far as the meeting. There's been some concern expressed by the parents about the third grade math program. I know that back in the day, we went into that everyday math program. I actually went to war on that one. And it spiraled. And it was very difficult for students who were not math prone because and students with disabilities because they didn't spend a lot of time on the topic. We then switched to a hybrid of, after educating, after training every teacher and buying textbooks K through 6 on everyday math, we went to a combination of Math Focus and Go Math to address those concerns and to meet the requirements of New York State math exam. So what I'm hearing from parents, and I know you could, Carol, I just wanted the board to be aware and for me to get accurate information, not hearsay, is that there's a concern that this current program moves a little too quickly and doesn't stay on topic. And I don't know, I know you've met with them. I don't know what kind of support you put in place or additional training to address those concerns.
Sure, yes, we did have some questions from the third grade parents. So what we did last Thursday, we had a parent university just for the third grade parents. And I think it was a good reminder that we haven't done enough parent universities around our math program. So it gave us an opportunity to talk about our approach, our pacing. Particularly in our third and fourth grade cohorts, we're just definitely still seeing some impacts of the pandemic, which we are responding to, and we're continually looking at the pacing to make sure it's appropriate and what supports we're providing for students. So we also got some good feedback from them in terms of what kinds of supports we can put in place for parents who want to support their kids at home. So I think it was a good meeting, and I definitely think a good reminder for me in terms of the kinds of things we can do to support the parents and hear them and work together.
Do you remember when you say that when we switched from everyday math to Go Math and Math in Focus, we did have math programs because it's nothing like the math that we did growing up. I mean, you practically need to have an art degree to do it. It's very different. It's a whole different process. So I think it would be helpful for these parents who want to support their kids to have instruction on how to do that. So they're giving them the proper information. Not like my husband, like, okay, I'm going to show you how to do a shortcut. I'm like, they don't get credit for that. Don't do that.
That was definitely something that came up in terms of the approaches they were taking. And so we said we would do more parent universities. And the other thing that the program, we talked to our consultant with the program, and she's going to provide us with a parent portal. So parents will be able to pull up at home videos of the lessons. That'll be an extra support. So just because of their feedback, we're putting that into place and have that. They're working on that for us the next couple of weeks. So we should have it probably even 3 weeks out to the parents. Oh no, for all of the groups.
So the parents, we're going to email the elementary parents and let them know that this resource is available.
And I'll mail it out once we get it up and running. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And so, Carol, like compared to when we went to school, it does move faster, right?
I don't think it's that it actually doesn't move faster, but I think what we're seeing post pandemic is we are spiraling back to some foundational skills and spending. So we're kind of really very carefully reviewing pacing constantly to kind of make sure we're filling in any gaps that exist, but also continuing to move forward. So I meet with the math team every 6 days and we look at, assessment data, how kids are doing, what do we need to do moving forward. So it's kind of definitely a living document in terms of our pacing.
And I do want to say, like, a lot of us have the experience, right? Oh my God, it moves so fast, and what's going on here? It's so different. But when I look at your data on the elementary school math, it's amazing, right? Like, amazing.
Yeah, kids are doing well.
Yeah.
We definitely have kids in particular grade levels that we still are seeing a little bit of gaps that we need to address. And I think we could always do a better job with everything. And we're also looking at how to provide support to kids who are struggling. So I think there's always room for improvement, but I think we should be proud of our overall results. And but again, always room for feedback and improvement.
I'm an enormous fan of Parent University and have taken them from the first opportunity I could get them. And I love to hear that you're considering bringing them back because I don't know, I actually need 7th grade support at this point and 4th grade support because as it was alluded to, like our kids are learning. I wish I learned math in this way. I would have had a shot at maybe understanding things better. But the only thing I wanted to add to this conversation is just seeing the direction of like the attendance for PTO meetings and different things. It might be an opportunity to consider some Zoom or, to extend the audience and have a bigger participation if they were offered not just in person, but maybe remotely as well.
I think.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, other trustees, and thank you, Carol. Any other new business?
Do have one. I went to the SEPTA meeting last week and something came up. The membership would really like to make sure that it's very clear where special education is highlighted on the district website. Oh, there was a second thing. The district social media pages are on fire.
Yeah,
Okay.
kudos, Shelley.
Yeah, and I wasn't going to point at Shelley because we're not supposed to highlight,
Shelley Newman. Hey.
but I mean, it's not just the frequency, but the content and it's like really exciting stuff. And since we never get to be in the schools, right, to be able to see it, like the video you posted the other day, it's very special, Shelley. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There is a lot happening. I
there's
think
a
it's,
lot.
but you know, it's easy to forget. And then you see it and you're reminded. And you're reminded of things. I'm never going to see a UPK class, but seeing those little kiddies, it's very, very cool. And so much. So thank you.
And let's keep it up with some News 12. Come on. I'm serious. Newsday, they're always featuring schools.
Yeah.
The NISBA newsletter, always featuring schools. We're doing good stuff here.
Unless there's any other new business, I think that's probably a perfect way to end the meeting. We're just before 11. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Meeting adjourned. Thanks again to the trustees.
Thank you. Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah.